actually does look like is that your living room?
No, not at all. I mean, it could be if it were like really nice, but no, my living room does not look like that.
But it gets set up like that, right? Like if you were sitting at your kitchen, like your dining room.
Yeah, no, that's true. Actually, yeah, it's on one side it's a couch instead of two chairs, but it's very similar. Absolutely, yeah.
Please call the roll.
Mayor Stewart.
Here.
Councilmember Kovar.
Here.
Councilmember DeBala.
Here.
Councilmember Kostick.
Here.
Councilmember Siemens.
Present.
Councilmember Smith,
Here.
Councilmember Searcy,
Here.
All right, thank you. Looking at our agenda coming up, we have just 2 council meetings left before the city elections. So next week, the council will be meeting in a closed session to receive legal advice from the city attorney at 6 p.m. We will come back for our regular public meeting at 7:30. We will begin the meeting as we've had this fall with recognitions. Then our voting session will include second reading ordinance authorizing the FY21 budget amendment number 2, first reading ordinance on the principles of compensation, that's the council compensation, a resolution regarding public art expenditures. Tentatively, we have a resolution providing for appointments to the Tree Commission. And in addition, we will likely have a resolution on the Committee on the Environment next week. The council received an email from the co-chairs on the Committee on the Environment that they voted to suspend formal operations at their meeting on Monday night so that they can have an opportunity for the remaining members to go through some racial justice conversations with a facilitator the city is providing and reevaluate the work they are doing. So the council needs to consider that request, and so we'll have a resolution next week on that. Our work sessions next week tentatively will be a contract for tree removal, an update on COVID-19 support, a work session on personnel matters, and an election update. And then on Wednesday, October 21st, our voting session will be a second reading ordinance of the council principles for compensation, a resolution regarding personnel matters, and tentatively a second reading ordinance authorizing contracts for tree removal. Our work sessions that evening, tentatively, we're still trying to get folks lined up for a stormwater presentation, but hopefully that will happen, and then an update on elections. And then we are not meeting on October 28th, as that is the week right before the elections. So there's our upcoming agenda. Now for the record, tonight, the first thing I want to do is recognize the Tacoma Park Silver Spring Co-op for its service and support to the community during the COVID-19 pandemic. I will read the mayoral proclamation. Whereas the co-op responded to increased demand for home groceries throughout late February and March by bringing in increased deliveries, adapting store operations for increased business, and even hired temporary workers who had been laid off at other businesses. And whereas the TPSS co-op made $6,000 in donations to local food security organizations throughout March to recognize the growing need in the community brought on by the economic fallout due to COVID-19. And whereas on March 24th, the co-op became the first grocery store nationally to close to the public and transition to an online-only model. The store made this decision to keep customers and staff safe. And whereas on June 12th, the co-op reopened to the public with a limited entry model while maintaining online ordering and streamlined curbside shopping to offer a variety of safe shopping options. And whereas the co-op has had no cases of customer or employee coronavirus throughout the pandemic, and whereas the co-op has kept full employment throughout the pandemic with no layoffs, and whereas the co-op has continued to work with local food distribution, such as those conducted by Small Things Matters and Sanctuary DMV, by providing space for storage and distribution. Now, therefore, I, Kate Stewart, Mayor of the City of Tacoma Park, Maryland, on behalf of the council, staff, and residents, do hereby express appreciation to the Tacoma Park Silver Spring Co-op for its service and support to the community during the COVID-19 pandemic. And I know, thank you. We're joined tonight by the general manager, Mike Houston, and I believe the chair of the board is also with us, correct? Did Diane get a chance to join us? Maybe it's just Mike. Mike, do you have a few words to say?
Yeah, very appreciative. Thank you, Mayor Stewart, and thank you to the entire council. It is a very strange time to operate a business, but our entire staff has really been fantastic throughout this, and just the outpouring of support from the community, has really been great. So we're excited to still be here and be serving everyone. just appreciate it.
Great. Well, thank you, Mike, and please extend our thanks to your entire staff for all they've been doing at this time. And thank you for joining us tonight.
Yeah.
Great. Next, we will have recognition of Indigenous Peoples Day. I'll read this as well. We have a lot of recognitions tonight. So, whereas Columbus Day is observed as a federal holiday on the second Monday in October, and whereas the day recognizes the October 12, 1492 landing of Christopher Columbus on an island in the Caribbean, marking the Europeans' first intrusion into the Americas. And whereas this contact began centuries of colonization on lands already settled by native peoples and exploitation of America's resources. And whereas Indigenous Americans experienced conquest, enslavement, displacement, and disease, which disseminated the population. And whereas Takoma Park now sits on the ancestral homelands of the Natachaktak and the Tutuxan and Piscataway peoples, and Indigenous people make their homes in the city today. And whereas the City Council recognized the second Monday on October as the Indigenous Peoples Day by adopting Resolution 2017-39, reimagining Columbus Day as an opportunity to celebrate Indigenous heritage and resiliency. And whereas, although it is a federal holiday, Columbus Day is not a holiday for the City of Takoma Park employees, and city government functions and meetings continue on their usual schedule. And whereas recognizing Indigenous Peoples Day serves as a reminder to reflect on the Native people, past and present, who have cared for this land over a millennium. Now, therefore, I, Kate Stewart, Mayor of the City of Takoma Park, Maryland, on behalf of the City Council, staff, and residents, hereby proclaim October 12th, 2020 as Indigenous Peoples Day in Takoma Park to acknowledge and celebrate the culture and sacrifice for the first people of this land. And just as a reminder, Gabby Tayak, who lives in Takoma Park, is going to be leading us in a greeting of the water ceremony on October 10th at 5 p.m. Given the continued restrictions on how many people can gather, we ask that you register on the city website to participate in that on Saturday. Great. Moving along, we have our next proclamation, which is International Pronouns Day. Whereas Takoma Park takes pride in being a welcoming, caring, and diverse community that strives to uphold individuals' human right to dignity. And whereas just as we don't want to assume a person's ethnicity or race by appearance or name, it is important not to make assumptions about the gender of another person based on that person's appearance or name. And whereas referring to people by the pronouns they determine for themselves is a basic to human dignity, and whereas being referred to by the wrong pronouns particularly affects transgender and gender nonconforming people, and whereas transgender youth are at significantly increased risk for depressive symptoms and suicide, according to the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, the Williams Institute, 41% of transgender individuals have reported attempting suicide compared to 4.6% among the general population. And whereas using the correct personal pronoun demonstrates respect and creates an inclusive and supportive environment, just as using a person's chosen name can be a way of respect to them. And whereas International Pronouns Day seeks to make asking, sharing, and respecting personal pronouns commonplace. Now, therefore, I, Kate Stewart, Mayor of the City of Takoma Park, Maryland, on behalf of the City Council, staff, and residents, hereby recognize October 21st, 2020 as International Pronouns Day. And I just want to recognize that we've been doing this for a number of years. And I think now that most of the city staff and council do have preferred pronouns in their signature on their emails. And I just want to thank everyone for doing that. Our last proclamation tonight is for Energy Efficiency Day. Whereas energy efficiency is the cheapest, quickest, and cleanest way to meet our energy needs and reduce utility bills for residential, business, and industrial customers. And whereas smarter energy use reduces the amount of energy we need to power our lives, which helps avoid emissions that can harm our health and pollute our air. And whereas implementing energy efficiency and other clean energy policies and programs helps boost economic opportunities and job creation while continuing to move toward a sustainable future. And whereas energy efficiency is a critical part of meeting Takoma Park's climate goals, and whereas improved energy standards for homes and commercial buildings also can significantly reduce utility costs and create new jobs, and Takoma Park supports increasing the minimum levels of efficiency for all buildings. And whereas for cities and states tackling harmful pollution, energy efficiency can get them about halfway toward their climate goals. And whereas the residents of Tacoma Park can continue to contribute to our energy efficiency efforts by learning about and participating in our energy efficiency programs. Whereas a nationwide network of energy efficiency groups and partners has designated the first Wednesday in October as the National Annual Energy Efficiency Day. And whereas together the residents of Tacoma Park, Maryland can continue to contribute to our sustainability efforts by learning more about energy efficiency and practicing smarter energy use in their daily lives. Therefore, I, Kate Stewart, Mayor, do hereby proclaim October 7th, 2020 as Energy Efficiency Day in Tacoma Park, Maryland, and urge residents to join us in supporting our clean energy goals and moving toward more energy efficiency now and in the future. So that does it for our proclamations this evening. Thank you, everyone. The first thing we actually have on our agenda tonight is we are joined by, let's see, oh, there's Josh. Hi. Josh, remind me how you say your last name so I don't pronounce it incorrectly.
Mayor, I appreciate that. It's Bo Key. Think of it sort of as a bow and a key. That's the easiest one.
I won't forget it now.
Okay.
Thank you for joining us this evening. Mr. Boki is the Director of Government and Regulatory Affairs at Comcast for the Beltway region. And before we turn it over to you to talk to us about the Internet Essentials Partnership Program, I just want to do a shout out and thank you for your assistance over the last couple of months to help us get rid of the dangling wires and connect us to the appropriate person at the county. It's huge. We still have a few around, but the difference it really does make and how long we were battling with that. So I just want to say thank you so much for being the person to help us with that and connecting us to the right people. So, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to you to tell us about the Comcast program.
Well, thank you, Mayor. And first, let me just say thank you for working with us on there. I always believe it's always a partnership. And so always appreciate everyone's patience and your residents' patience, as we identified, cleaning up those wires and, what was ours and what wasn't. So thank you. We appreciate that. Mayor and Council, thank you, first of all, for this opportunity to provide a few remarks this evening. As the Mayor said, my name is Josh Boki. I'm the Director of Government Affairs here for Comcast, and I've been with Comcast now for about 13 years now. And I'm pleased to share some information about our own efforts to help close the digital divide. I think we're all fully aware now how important digital equity is and how the disparity that exists today is interconnected to the health of really the larger economy, that it's interconnected to the success of individual households and really towards achieving the overall goal of equity itself. And we also recognize, I think, that it's a complex issue. First, the problem itself has multiple definitions. If you happen to live in a primarily rural ag area, access to the internet is about the last mile challenge where density is low. But conversely, in more urban and suburban areas, access and equity focus in more on issues of affordability. And then I think also beyond that on issues of engagement, So for instance, a student may be connected to the internet, but meaningful engagement may become a challenge if, say, they are a high school student and they need to watch their siblings, or perhaps they have device-related issues. So as a result, there's no one-size issue or one-size solution when I think it comes to addressing digital equity and access. And I think it will take a combination of government and business and nonprofit sectors really all working together. And I think, thankfully, we do see that here, not just in the state of Maryland, but here in Montgomery County. So if I may, I'll go ahead and take a minute to share with each of you the role that Comcast has been playing, because we have been in the forefront in the private sector of helping to bridge that digital access issue for many years now. First, let me take a minute to talk about Internet Essentials. Internet Essentials is the program, it's the nation's largest community investment program from the private sector that's designed specifically to bring affordable, high-speed internet access to those families and individuals who don't have it today. Internet Essentials is high-speed broadband. It's 25 megs down. It's able, so for instance, to handle multiple video calls. Internet Essentials is participants are able to also purchase a refurbished computer. The cost of the service itself is $9.95 per month without a contract. And families and individuals are also who are eligible to participate in federal and state assistance is who the program is open to. So the program, Internet Essentials, began really about 6 years ago, and it centered around the National School Lunch Program. But since that time, we expanded the program to include, for eligibility, low-income veterans who are on state and federal assistance, low-income seniors that may be on assistance, and generally, as well as families and individuals who may live in HUD-supported housing. And then last fall, really opened it up to anyone who may qualify for general, state, or federal assistance. The main qualifier being that they do not currently have Comcast internet within the last 90 days. There's been some updates to the program in response to the COVID public health crisis. And obviously, I think we all remember when the world really did change back in March and everyone was, went to the virtual environment, was moving towards that quickly. And so as a result, Internet Essentials also made some adjustments as well, including that folks who sign up from March to at least the end of the year would receive the first 60 days courtesy of that service. And we also removed certain requirements, for instance, that any type of prior Comcast bad debt, so for instance, perhaps an unpaid bill, perhaps unreturned equipment, that is not necessarily a barrier to entering the program anymore. And because we recognize that, essentially, right, life happens. And our mission has been to keep our customers connected and work towards keeping communities connected, especially during COVID. And then the last piece of this that just touched on briefly is that we created, in tandem with Internet Essentials, a unique partnership program called Internet Essentials Partnership Program, or IEPP for short. And the partnership program is really designed for third-party organizations, so school systems, workforce agencies, nonprofits, and other agencies who want to sponsor, maybe in bulk, those folks who are signing up for Internet Essentials, where they recognize that that $9.95 subsidy may still be a barrier. And it's proved to be a pretty popular program in terms of its participation across the region with partners. Finally, I'll just close with this because I think I would be remiss if I didn't mention a moment that we have established a lot of local partnerships within Montgomery County over the years, and really focusing right on the intention of supporting digital student learning and bringing access to technology in combination, utilizing that technology for education together for all students, right, regardless of income. Some of our current and past partners have been Identity Youth, Casa de Maryland, the Montgomery Housing Partnership, Kids Museum, Gandhi Brigade, to just name a few. So let me stop there. I appreciate this opportunity to share a little bit about our program and the efforts that we're trying to make, and sort of the shared efforts that I think everyone is attempting to make during this time. Thank you.
Sorry, I was on mute. Thank you for joining us this evening. So I want to just turn over just quickly to my colleagues to see if anybody had any follow-up questions while we have you with us. And thank you for sending materials ahead of time as well. That was very helpful.
You're very welcome.
Let's see, Councilman Searcy.
Hello. Thank you so much, and your presentation was really, really helpful. A couple of questions. So, in terms of income verification and the level of documentation that program participants would need to provide, one of the things that's really important here in the city is we have a number of, we're a sanctuary city, we have a number of undocumented residents who may not apply for social services, but could definitely benefit from a program such as this. Through your partnership program, have you ever worked with partners to identify other criteria for inclusion. So, for example, we have rent stabilization here. You know, is it that we could, if you're living in a rent stabilized unit, make you eligible? I'm just trying to think through making sure that providing documentation around or income verification or documentation around receipt of social services might, you know, be a barrier for some in our community. And I was just wondering if there's ever been any flexibility there.
Councilmember, I appreciate that question. We are aware that there's sensitivity and understand when it comes to documentation and the type of documents that may be available. I should have sent around before, and I can send around afterwards, that we actually have, there's a number of different ways in terms of, so for instance, if someone doesn't have a social security number, there's a workaround, so to speak, about how to go about that. And I don't want to misspeak. It would be better is I will put it on my to-do list to send afterwards, if I may, sort of what all those different ways to go about qualifying. Our goal is to not put up barriers for folks who can qualify. We want to work with them as much as possible so that they can qualify to enter the program.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Great. Anyone else have any questions? Thank you for that question. That was very helpful. Councilmember Smith.
Josh, I want to thank you for joining us this evening. I appreciate you being on the community call that I hosted a couple weeks back where we first broached this topic. Can you lay out what would be the next steps if we were to pursue providing internet essentials for our residents?
There could be a number of different ways to go about that, depending on the partnerships that are available and interested, right? So from the most basic level, we can certainly make information available about internet essentials, right? And can make that available to all of your offices. All of our information comes standard, first of all, in English and Spanish, and it is also standard in about, I want to say the last count was about 12 other languages as well. So that we can make available, and we make that we have that available in print, but we also can make available in a PDF downloads. So that's the first part, right? The general outreach. In terms of the partnership program, I think that whether whoever that entity is or would be, and it works differently in different places. Some have been school systems directly. Some have been foundations. Others have just been nonprofits, and other partners are actually government agencies themselves. But the next step I would say would probably be to sit down with whoever that partner ends up being, if that's to move forward, and then continue to review sort of the questions and the details of how to go about that. Again, the goal of the IEPP program is to make that as seamless as possible. And I'll say that that is it's a brand new program. It did not exist before April. We have made adjustments as well as we've been working with partners across the country, including here in Maryland. We've taken their feedback about, well, how do we make that in terms of the sign-in process. So for instance, everyone's assigned a client representative that walks through the whole process, right? So again, the goal is, to make that as straightforward as possible. And,
I would be remiss in not mentioning that Grace has met with us, and she did have a number of questions. And one question she talked about the young people in our community. Can you elaborate on the farms usage? If a school has a certain percentage of farms, how many qualify for the Internet Essentials program?
So if a school, the school population has 40% or more of the students who are eligible for school lunch, then we consider all of those students, regardless of whether they themselves have families that are eligible, to be qualified into the program. Again, this is a new access program, right, for internet. So the same criteria apply, but assuming that everything else moves, checks out. But the difference is that if they were to call or go online, to sign up for the program, that school would actually be in our database, and they know they don't have to then fill out an application. Really, then they're automatically going into that process of, okay, you do not have service with us, you automatically qualify. Now we'll go ahead and get you signed up. And that process is that they will receive a self-install kit modem. And I want to make this point because I think it is probably important, is that once someone is signed up in Internet Essentials, they are a full Comcast customer. They receive the same internet security protections as others. They do receive a monthly bill, except that they're month to month. It's just how they became a Comcast customer in a different way, but they're still a Comcast customer from there on out afterwards.
And do you know for certain if Blair and Rolling Terrace, they would qualify automatically? Do you know if those schools in our catchment?
Councilmember, I haven't looked at the list recently.
Okay.
But the names, and in fact, I'm familiar with the schools. I used to live in Montgomery County. I do believe in remembering the list that likely probably are, but I would certainly confirm that. That would be one of the things I would confirm.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councilman Costick.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to follow up since you were mentioning previously that the service requirements applied, that they people could not have had Comcast service, I think you said, within the last 90 days. And if a partnership were established, are those kinds of requirements able to be waived?
So thank you, Councilmember, for the question. That is the standard policy. Because the program was designed as a new access program. But again, I think we were talking with the partners, and depending on the partnership, that I never say never, but that's the standard policy.
Okay, great. Thank you for bringing this to us.
Pleasure.
Great. Well, thank you very much for coming this evening. I think we can. And Councilmember Smith for asking us to put this on our agenda. I think we can talk to the staff, see what other questions they have, and continue the conversation. So thank you so much. And again, thank you for all your help with the wires and everything. Have a great evening.
Thank you. You all too. Thank you very much.
Great. All right. Now I want to turn to our public comments this evening. First, we have voting items tonight on a first reading ordinance on our budget amendment, an emergency ordinance regarding appointments to various boards and commissions and committees, and a resolution adopting a committee code of conduct. But if I am correct, and I just want to check with the city clerk, we do not have any comments on voting items. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
All right, then we will go to general public comments, and the first person we have on the list is Emmanuel Wagner. Is he with us?
Yes.
Great.
All right. Dear council members, dear city manager, dear deputy city manager, thank you for the opportunity to provide brief comments. Since this is a council meeting recognizing a number of notable dates, I would like to make you aware of National Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Day, which will be celebrated tomorrow, October 8th, to highlight the role that green hydrogen and zero-emission fuel cell technology can play in our future energy portfolio. Hydrogen fuel cells can replace diesel and gasoline engines today with similar performance, range, and duty cycle. Green hydrogen can also be used in hard-to-electrify sectors like marine, aviation, chemical production, and steel manufacturing. It can also be used to replace natural gas as a carbon-free alternative, allowing for a resilient and green energy economy. It can also be transported over large distances and provide seasonal energy storage. If you would like to learn more, I welcome you to go to hydrogenandfuelcellday.org. And why is the day 10:08? I will let the folks with a STEM background figure that one out. Furthermore, October 21st is National Bioenergy Day, which will highlight the benefits of sustainable biomass in our energy portfolio. The city of Tacoma Park has been on the forefront of adopting low-cost biomass stoves for homes, and I would like to see a continuation of the role of biomass in our climate plan. More info on that is available under bioenergyday.com. Now, you might ask why I'm making this shameless plug for these energy technologies. I bring this up because the city has declared a climate emergency and has passed a climate framework, but there's a lot of detail that needs to be worked out. The two examples I mentioned are among the potential solutions to consider. Unfortunately, as you mentioned in the beginning, the Committee on the Environment has suspended their activities. So I really urge the council to fast track the development of a new process and criteria to better represent our community in city committees, and to allow the committees to then do their work and provide you with recommendations. While our small city has a minuscule impact on the climate, we all need to do our part, and we need to do it soon. And lastly, it is election season and things can get a bit heated. So I want to take this opportunity to extend my appreciation to the city staff and all the work they do. All the staff that I encounter, be it the trash pickup guys who always wave at my toddler and me in the morning when we run to see them, or the city manager who is super responsive to inquiries, or the city staff supporting the committees. Let me thank you for all the work that you do. I see a lot of heated discussion on the listservs, and I just want to take a moment to thank you and say that your work is appreciated. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wagner. Has Mary Jane Machui joined us?
She has not.
Okay, we'll come back. Joan Fry.
She should be here.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Ms. Fry, we can hear you.
Hi, I want to thank you very much for allowing me a few minutes to make some comments regarding the climate emergency response framework. I definitely echo some of the comments that Emmanuel just made in regards to the importance of this topic and the timeliness. I am live on Garland Avenue in Ward 2. I am a member of the Tacoma Park Mobilization Environment Committee, and I also served on the county-wide Climate Planning Technical Work Group on Transportation. I'm a member of the Electric Vehicle Association of the Greater DC area and Maryland Solar United Neighbors. I'm a EV owner and have solar panels on the roof of our house. So clearly very strongly committed to climate change mitigation. I want to emphasize, I believe that the government should be doing all that it can because this is an emergency. I follow the literature way too much in some ways regarding this topic, and tipping points are occurring and may continue to occur that could lead to catastrophic change that is going to be much more difficult to correct if we don't take action now. Taking action is critically important, but it really needs to be emphasized that in this case, taking action too late is equivalent to taking no action at all. If we don't solve this problem within the next 10 years and really make progress, we will not be able to stop this huge snowball rolling down the hill. At the same time, we can't afford to take incremental steps. People are arguing in many ways denialism. The new form of climate denialism is let's do things much more slowly. The framework adopted by the City Council in early March is the first step of being real about this. And we're looking forward to seeing more concrete steps as part of the implementation plan. The devil is in the detail. I strongly urge members of the City Council to stay forward focused, not get distracted by those who perhaps didn't support it in the first place and would like to revisit the whole issue, and also to be bold. I want to thank those on the council for taking this topic up. It's not easy and it's tremendously difficult in light of the COVID. And there are committed members in the community that are eagerly awaiting to hear what the next steps will be, and look forward to working with City Council members to help bring this about. Thank you very much for allowing me a few minutes to make comments.
Thank you. Thank you for coming this evening. Next up, we have Mr. David Blockstein.
Good evening, and thank you very much for your time. And I will echo both Emmanuel and Joan in first, David Blockstein from 7016 Sycamore Avenue, Ward 3. And first to echo Emmanuel and to thank all of you for your continued dedication, fabulous professional effort, and personal commitment to our city and our health and safety. I want to give, especially tonight, a big shout out to Gina Mathias, who will be speaking later tonight. I did go through her presentation in advance, and I'm really very impressed with what she and you others have been able to do, given the basically you passed the resolution, and then we all went into COVID emergency state. But despite that, you've done a lot in supporting the residents throughout the city, integrating in the sustainability actions with the housing and the low and middle income assistance. And so kudos to all of you, and to echo Joan that unfortunately we can't take our foot off the renewable fuel pedal, and we need to go full speed ahead in moving forward on turning the resolution and the Sustainable Climate Action Plan into action and implementation. And again, just to echo Joan, that many of us are ready to continue to do our part and to continue to help you all. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you. Thank you very much. Is Mr. Eubner with us?
He is.
Okay.
Isn't he? Where did he?
Ready, Jesse, can you hear me?
Oh, there you are. Yes.
I saw my name on the screen. FYI, you guys are not transmitting video on Fios Verizon tonight, although the audio is live. It's just for you to know in case people talk to you. And now, with your permission, good evening, Paul Hubner, Ward 3. Now that NDC has finally replied after over a month to inquiries from Council Member Kostick, I want to know what is going to be done about this ridiculous plan to eliminate access to the private parking lot of the Tacoma Park Food Co-op from Route 410. First, is it true that NDC is trying to convince the SHA to close the entrance for 410 to the Food Co-op parking lot? If so, how long has the mayor or city manager known of this? And why have they not deemed this absolutely unacceptable? I would remind every one of you that were polled in 2016 that protecting the co-op both during construction and after development was the most agreed upon demand of all council members and most city residents. Why and when will the mayor, the city manager, and the council stop postponing the inevitable reckoning with this reckless, disrespectful developer? This developer who has continued to mislead residents and council alike by altering submissions to the city, council, and the county and the state, by enlarging the building, raising its height, eliminating parking, and convincing the mayor and even the council to remove the co-op as the anchor tenant after agreeing this is one of the benchmarks of the development agreement. At every juncture, NDC has altered their plans, misrepresented or hidden their plans, and sought to lay enormous cost burdens upon the food co-op and the city residents. From abandoning the original design of rear parking and loading docks for an unworkable abomination of a lay-by to an $87,000 legal contract absorbed by the residents, to the NDC desired redesign of the entire intersection, which will cost millions in tax dollars, shouldered by residents for NDC's profits, this administration has buckled and failed in its responsibilities to our community. The mayor and city council have shirked their responsibility. We, the residents of Tacoma Park, the co-op members and employees, those of us living in and nearby neighborhoods around the junction deserve honest answers and responsible action in the face of this total mismanagement of the problems with Tacoma Junction. The time is now, not months from now after waiting and waiting again and again for the county permit office, the state highway administration, or the county planning board, or any other excuse to delay direct action. The time to remind this developer of their contractual agreement and reassert the city's authority is now. We need to demand that the co-op be the anchor tenant, as you all promised. The city needs a junction development plan acceptable to the residents, or get rid of this developer. That's all I got to say for tonight. Hope you guys have a
Thank you.
pleasant evening.
Great. I asked the city clerk, did Ms. Machui join us?
No, we are not being successful in assisting her at this
Great.
point.
All right. Is Diana with us, or is?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. We'll go to her next.
Yes, I am here. This is Diana Yance. I live at 206 Spring Avenue in Tacoma Park. And I just have a short message. I really applaud the city for enacting that's probably the wrong word, but in any case, your sustainable climate action plan and I want you to go forward with aggressive and bold actions in enacting ordinances that achieve the goals of the climate emergency resolution. That's all I have to say.
Okay. Well, thank you for joining us tonight. All right. And then we have our last speaker this evening. I saw her pop up before and then she disappeared.
Is this,
Hi, I'm
Okay.
here.
Yes, yes,
Hi.
yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
Hi. Well, my name's Kara Sol-Rinaldi. I live on Kennebec Avenue, Ward 5, and I just want to. I actually am going to be echoing what a number of folks have said today. Manuel, Joan, David, and the last woman who I didn't catch her name. I want to thank the city for the work that they've done on climate. And like David mentioned, I wanted to say that I've been impressed with Gina's efforts. I've spent 25 years working on climate change. I worked on the Hill, and I've worked in nonprofits. I run a firm specifically focused on energy efficiency and climate change. And thank you again for your proclamation on Energy Efficiency Day. I've testified before Congress and state legislatures on climate, and I just wanted to be sure to recognize the incredible work that you all have done to move this forward as something that Tacoma Park stands behind. Climate change is critical to it being addressed, and I'm proud that the city that I live in is making this an important something that we are going to stand behind and put our own actions behind. I do want to urge us to go forward on those details. The devil is in the details on energy efficiency and in renewable energy. It always is. And so I would hope that we would have additional options to work with the city on some of those details. Some of them that came out, I'd be interested in working with the city on. But I really love the direction that we're going, and I just wanted to support that. And while I rose today to speak on climate change, given that another topic was brought up, I would also like to tell you that I strongly support the council and the work that the mayor and the council have done on development. And I want you to know that I and many people believe you should stay the course, and that you've done a lot of work to advance efforts related to development. And I hope that we see some sound development policy and like those that the judgment that you've been showing. I think there's been a lot of work to think it through, and and I'm looking forward to having more businesses in Tacoma Park so that we can visit them on our weekends rather than having to go to other parts of the county. So thank you very much for your work there, as well as the incredible work you've been doing on climate change. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you for joining us this evening. I'll just check with the city clerk one more time. Do we have anyone else joining us for public comments tonight?
no, I'm afraid not. That's it.
Okay. Terrific. I will move on to council comments, and I just want to remind my colleagues that tonight is a historic night on the VP presidential debate. And so urging folks for brevity so that we may be able to catch as much of it as possible. So with that, do I have any council comments? Councilwoman Searcy.
I'm going to be short, but I have my DVR set. So
you're going old school.
No, it's all digital now. All you have to do is just hit that button and it works. You don't even need a box. I just real quick, I only have actually one update. Well, two. Reminding everyone about the Crowdsource Farmers Market, like I do all the time, that it's such a great place. I want to make sure that people go. And second, I want to thank the residents of New Hampshire Gardens. We had a neighborhood association meeting last night, and I am appreciative of residents coming together to talk about things that are impacting the community, including traffic calming and Purple Line and all of those good things. So thank you all so much for coming out last night. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Councilman Costa.
Thank you. I will also try to be brief, although I think you might be an incredible optimist if you think we'll get out of here on time. I wanted to share a couple of brief updates from the Access for All committee meeting for the Transportation Planning Board, which we had yesterday. There were two really interesting presentations about the impact of transportation and lack of transportation for people with disabilities and older adults in particular, but also across the board for people who are transportation disadvantaged and do not have access to transportation. The first presentation we heard is a really interesting project that is happening in Eastern Maryland. And they've done some research on providing transportation access for people who don't typically have access to transportation to non-emergency medical appointments. And they've actually found a return on investment of $6 for every dollar spent on the transportation that they provide, the transportation assistance that they provide in terms of being able to help people prevent serious illness and job, time off of jobs and other things as a result. So I thought that was a really fascinating and important bit of research that they shared. And the second was a survey, and I will send around to my colleagues and anyone else who's interested. I'll send around the presentations from these. But the other was a national survey from the National Aging and Disability Transportation Center. They do an annual survey on access to transportation for people with disabilities and older adults. And their research found that only about a quarter of people who took the survey said that transportation was good, and only 1 in 5 found that it was affordable. And that 77% of the agencies they surveyed said finding transportation was very difficult for people who were trying to access really anything, medical appointments, food, groceries, and other things as well. So I thought this was some really useful information about just the transportation need that people face, and some things for us to think about as we work on trying to assist people in meeting those needs. So thank you very much.
As Mayor Pro Tem, I will now call on Terry.
Sorry, I just thought you had more. I was like waiting for more. Councilmember Siemens, you're next. Sorry, I thought Councilman Costick was going to have more.
You said be brief.
Thank you. I will try to be brief. The county's Tower Commission today was making a decision on the application for new antennas on the Park Ritchie apartment building. And we have all heard the concerns about there being possibly too many emissions from the existing antennas, and that this is going to make things worse and more dangerous potentially for residents and neighbors of the Park Ritchie apartments. I am glad to hear that the calculations have shown that it should be safe. The Tower Commission I believe, I don't know what the action that they took today, but they were contemplating passing this application along and approving it. There would still be additional steps for permitting before those antennas could be installed. But I would ask the city manager and the council to consider the city actually contracting for emissions tests to check and make sure that there are not excessive emissions passing the standards. And the reason I suggest that is because the Tower Commission had not, as of this afternoon, requested actual measurements to determine whether it was safe or not. They are going just on scientific calculations based on the number and types of antennas that are there. At the very least, I think the city should get a bid on what it would take to actually do the emissions tests so that we can approach the county and demand that the tests be performed to put the community at ease and also to ensure the safety of our residents. On a second note, I was kind of surprised to hear that Halloween is already upon us. With we started with the scary stories tonight, and maybe it didn't just start tonight, but I would like to just reassure the community that the council, from anything I've heard from anybody, is not planning to put the co-op out of business. We want the co-op to stay as a thriving business and viable business here in our community. The threat of closing the parking lot certainly would be a hardship on the co-op or any business for that matter. And I think that there was maybe some missing information. I think there's a lot of scary stories that we can expect between now and election time. And I hope the community takes in consideration that we do want the co-op to stay open. We do want it to be a viable business, and we would actually like it to be an anchor for that location. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Councilmember Siemens. Next, we have Councilmember Smith.
First, I would like to thank Josh Boakey for joining us this evening. I think Internet Essentials Partnership Program would be a great initiative for the council. I hope in subsequent meetings the council does take this up. There are a number of families in this community where they just don't have internet access. And right now, you need it for everything, especially if you're trying to look for a job, filing social services, benefits, and trying to relieve the internet access that kids are having to use for online school instruction. So I do hope the council does take this up. I had an opportunity to participate in the Maryland Municipal League's board meeting this morning. One of the issues that we took up were changes to the Montgomery County chapter bylaws, since we had a virtual election this past time. We memorialized the way we are going to do that election in the future if we have to have a virtual election again. And we also passed the audited financials that were presented to the board. Also had the opportunity to listen to the Fed is doing something that has never been done before. They are hosting a series of workshops on racism and the economy. It's led by the fair chairs of Atlanta, Boston, and Minneapolis. They are bringing experts in trying to center Blackness and trying to get more Black and Brown people fully participating in the economy. So if you get a chance, please do a Google search. It was, the first session was unbelievable. And then that is it. And I wish Senator Harris the best in tonight's debate.
Councilmember Kovar.
Thank you, Mayor, I'll try to be brief. First of all, I do want to follow up on what Councilmember Siemens mentioned, and with regard to the cell towers. And what I'd like to do, I did mention this concept before, but I think since it's clearly an ongoing issue, we ought to do it, is to, in addition to what my colleague mentioned about exploring what it would take to do the analysis, to also send a letter to the county asking them to change their procedures so that the measurement isn't just done through a computer simulation, but actual real-time actual measurement. So I think that would be a good step for us to take to urge the county to make that change. One of the things I've heard from a few residents about is areas in some of the sidewalks that are unsafe. And I know we put on hold the sidewalk repair funds as part of the, well, really the main part of the funds that we have on hold for potential use in COVID. And I will acknowledge that I was the one that proposed using that particular source of funds. What I'm wondering is when we, in our upcoming meeting, look into the on hold funds and what we're doing on COVID, whether we could also explore if there are actual safety concerns on sidewalks as opposed to just general need to repair and keep up with the condition, whether there could be for small sections an exception made. And I don't know what that would involve, and I don't know what my colleagues would think, but I think that's something we could at least take a look at. A couple of other things I've heard from residents who have asked about the condition of some of the public parks. And I heard from Public Works that they have a challenge right now in keeping up with the weeding and the general upkeep because of the COVID. And they're actually very open to and inviting residents who wish to participate as kind of a weed control brigade to help out with that. And I'll send something out separately on this to the list, but anyone who's watching, feel free to get in touch with Public Works, and they are willing to put us all to work to help out with that. And I think under the circumstances that could be better than just letting things slide or take longer to remain sort of in the more typical spruced up condition that they have. So please do get in touch with Public Works if you're interested. And just two other things I wanted to mention. I did talk with Public Works about this also, and I don't know all the challenges that may be connected to it. But when the street sweeping takes place, we don't have the system that other communities have where you're supposed to move your car on the day the sweeping's coming by. And I think it's hard for us to be able to completely know in advance what the schedule's like, but I wonder whether there might be some mechanism, maybe not every time the sweeping occurs, but more periodically, so that on streets where there's only parking on one side and that side never really gets swept because there's always cars there, whether there would be a way to address that. And then the last thing I just wanted to mention, I appreciate that the mayor read the proclamation about Indigenous Peoples Day. And I do encourage residents who are interested to attend the event. Back when we approved the change a few years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, from Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day, one of the things that I thought was important, and I was glad we included in the resolution to do that, was that we not just make the change and sort of brush our hands up and say, oh, we did that, but that we actually include in there the idea that we ought to have some sort of events or programs connected to it. And I'm really happy that Gabrielle Tayak, who's a resident of Ward 1 and has vast experience in interpreting and curating historical and other kinds of information connected to Native Americans and lives in Ward 1, has spoke last year and now has organized this event for us. I hear there might be rain that day, but since it's connected to the waters anyway, maybe that'll be okay. But I encourage folks to turn out for that, because I think it's a good example of going beyond just sort of making this symbolic statement, but actually having an event that is connected to the purpose of the change. Thank you.
Great, Councilman Deval. We can't hear you, sorry.
Okay, I think I got it now. Thank you. thanks to all the people who came out to make public comment. I was gonna say, even though one of the speakers already said that it's Energy Efficiency Day and the mayor already said it, but I want to challenge everybody on the council to do one thing this week that you haven't done already, to take an individual action to reduce the energy use of your home. I'm going with power strips. Just that's my choice for the week. I was going to go with tightening my windows, but when it's 80 degrees out, I don't really feel like it. It's not just about climate, it's also about your own comfort, whether you're a homeowner or a renter, and it's about reducing your bills. So that's my brief pitch on that. I also wanted to thank the city TV for running the Street Fest over the weekend. We were dancing Saturday night to previous year's concerts, and it was just so much fun. And last, to say that we're going to have a neighborhood meeting, a block meeting on Auburn on Thursday, October 15th from 7 to 8 p.m. Before that, in the late afternoon, there'll be a little outside social distance, meet your neighbors thing. And if any other blocks are interested in doing a neighborhood issues meeting, just let me know. Thank you.
Councilman Kostick, are you coming back again?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I told you
I was too brief. So as I went to send you all forward you the information from the meeting, there was another bit of information I thought might be useful from the Access for All information that was forwarded around. It appears that WMATA is considering budget cuts due to COVID-19. And there is a hearing there's public comments this, actually it's not this Friday, it is October 19th at 9 a.m. and a public hearing at 3 p.m. on October 13th. I can send around the budget document, and I'm still looking through it myself for what the impacts would be to Tacoma Park, but there are a few of the WMATA buses that pass through Tacoma Park that would be impacted by this. So I think we should take a look at that.
Great. Thank you for bringing that up. Just a couple of things. I was the group of Montgomery County mayors. We get together once a month to talk about issues impacting cities in Montgomery County. And this week we had Gwen Wright of the Planning Department and Casey Anderson, chair of the Planning Board, joined us and presented the Thrive, the general plan for 2050, I think it is, that they've been looking at in Montgomery County. And I just want to remind people that public comments, there's a public hearing on that on November 19th. So you can get the full plan and take a look at it. But if you're thinking about where is Montgomery County going in the next couple of decades, it was a good presentation, and I encourage people to look at it, and if moved to sign up for the public hearing on November 19th. And then the last thing is I just want to do a shout out to the city staff for the Equity Walk. That's around the city, particularly. Actually, I've got to see it a couple of times when I've gone to the Crossroads Market, and I noticed today that there's a QR code that you can now scan and get more information. And I got on the webpage, and it's very neat. So I just want to encourage folks to check that out and thank all of the city staff. I know there were a number of people who were involved in that. So thank you. And I'll turn it over to the city manager.
Thank you very much. Yes, the Equity Walk, today's Walk to School Day, if there were walking to school happening. So it's kind of the kickoff of the Equity Walk. And if you do go online, it is absolutely incredible what they've done. It's in English, Spanish, and Amharic, easily translated for you. It also has really good age-appropriate book recommendations, so you can look and see for which age your kids are, what books might be appropriate to go along with it, and it's fun. That was a project that the city was awarded $1,500 from the group called America Walks, and we have had really nice volunteer help, as well as a lot of different departments working together to get this done. I'm not going to take too much time on it now. On another night, I would have scanned around the screen, but it's better than you think. It's worth going online and seeing it and trying it out. I wanted to just note that we have Halloween information now online. So please share that with your constituents. We have, certainly we have online events for Friday in the evening, Friday, October 30th and Saturday, October 31st, and a number of outdoor events. It's an ever-changing discussion about how you do outdoor events for Halloween, and we think we're good, but just so you know, everything has an asterisk on it. So keep posted, we'll keep getting the words out. I was at chairing the COG Chief Administrative Officers meeting today. And one of the questions was, what are other jurisdictions doing? There is no jurisdiction that is really allowing door-to-door trick-or-treating. Many of them aren't prohibiting it, but they are strongly discouraging it. So we went around and the big counties and the small towns are not doing trick-or-treating. So we're all looking at ways to do safely other fun activities, and we'll have fun in Takoma Park. And I want to see everybody decorate their place. One of the things that's really cool is apartment dwellers can even do interior rooms decorated and be in the contest. So it really is for everybody. I also want to note that we have the ballot drop boxes placed. We have the county presidential ballot drop box and a Takoma Park ballot drop box in the parking lot and the lower level entrance off of Maple Avenue at the community center. It is a steady stream of people dropping off those presidential ballots. I appreciate it. We have kind of locked up the Takoma Park boxes so people don't accidentally put things in there because they're really cool looking and you just want to use it. So we have a Takoma Park ballot box right next to the silver Montgomery County presidential one. At the community center, we also have at the rec center a Takoma Park ballot box. We will unlock those once the ballots are mailed out to residents. So anybody who is a Takoma Park resident who's registered to vote will get in the mail without having to request one, a ballot. They can be put in the mail to return, or you can use one of these two ballot drop boxes. And I think it's working. So I will say, I mean, Jesse's working her butt off and her team is working, they're going nuts, but really it's come together well. And I think it's a good system. And people seem to be happy when they put their ballots in that silver ballot drop box right now. They take pictures of themselves. They are cheered that they are voting. And it's a neat scene to see.
Could I ask one question about that? And if
yes, sir,
you prefer that we wait until the end when we have our work session on the elections, that's fine. But do we know yet what date roughly we think they'll be mailed out? I know there was talk about trying to do it perhaps as soon as this Friday, but I'm not sure if that's still...
I think it's moving along pretty close to that. So I think you'll get them next week.
Okay.
I'd like to take just a moment. I have a statement I'd like to share that because I've been receiving a lot of recent messages, comments, emails, posts on listservs that criticize me, which is fair game, but they also include references to me being female. And I'm female, and that's true, but being female is not related to the merits of my work. I have been the victim of sex discrimination at times in my life. I've been raped. My experiences are pretty common for a person of my age. For several decades, I've been fortunate to be in Takoma Park, where I've largely been judged on my work as a human. Recently, however, I'm referred to as the female city manager, part of a female-led city. The word female is practically spit out. I am glad that neither my husband nor my mother are alive to see this. My husband would be trying to defend my honor. My mom would be speaking to the council at public comment session with her friends from Victory Tower, reading a written statement she would have spent hours writing and editing. But they knew, as I know, that this is not the real Tacoma Park, and it should not be the real Tacoma Park. These comments, their microaggressions, have real consequences. They add to the negativity of the national political environment. They add to the mental health stresses of the pandemic. They can add to rudeness at the grocery store and domestic violence at home. And they can stifle the dreams of young people who wish to be leaders, to succeed in life in ways that have nothing to do with gender. So I ask folks to please bite your tongue, count to 10 before including gender in these comments. I ask that emails and listserv posts remain in a draft folder until you've slept on it and can look at the comments again with fresh eyes. While the comments might give you a thrill at the moment, they're not likely to be looked at with pride later. Let's continue to have a Tacoma Park where we can all be judged positively or negatively on our merits and not our gender. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. We'll move now to our voting session. The first item is the first reading ordinance authorizing FY21 budget amendment number 2. I think I'll turn it over to the city manager because there's a couple of changes since the work session.
That's right. There are 2 changes that we've made. I described at least one of them, I think, at the work session. But I have added in a $50,000 budget expenditure for the facilitation work for the Public Safety Task Force. And so that would come out of the reserves, although I do believe that there will be money from personnel savings in the police department that would cover this. That's something that we can talk about in next week and the following week. I suggested 50,000, but it may be different once we get the proposals and we see that and we can adjust that. The other change that I've made is to remove the FEMA emergency assistance revenue reimbursement because we learned after we put it in the draft that it was actually applicable to FY20. So the auditors are dealing with it as opposed to having us deal with it in the FY21 budget amendment number 2. I don't think there's any other information that changes since the last time, and I'm happy to answer any questions if you have them.
Great, thank you. Would someone like to move the first reading ordinance authorizing FY21 budget amendment number 2? Councilmember Siemens.
Come on, folks, I need it.
Yeah. All right, Councilmember Siemens, Councilwoman Costick seconded, and I see Councilwoman Costick's hand up. Question or comment?
Thank you. Just 2 relatively quick things. One is about the FEMA reimbursement. Does that then change any other aspect of the budget for FY21? Or are there funds that are then reimbursed and then we have additional funds in FY21, or am I not understanding that correctly?
Well, you'll get all the information when the audit comes out and the CAFR comes out. So anything that is excess revenue or reimbursements and that kind of thing will show up eventually as going into our FY21 revenue. So unappropriated funds. So this is always the time when we're getting down to like, which dollar went into which year, but you'll see all that laid out in the CAFR.
Okay, thank you. And then also just want to thank you really for taking the time when I know you're very, very busy to go through and work on some of the spreadsheet presentation of the material. I really find that useful and I really, really appreciate it.
I'm going to try to standardize it in a better way, but I appreciate it and I'd like your feedback on how that's most useful for you. You're muted, Mayor.
Sorry, Councilmember Kovar. I have my windows open tonight because it's so nice out, but it gets noisy.
Thank you. Just one question. Some of the material came in relatively late and I didn't get a chance to look it over as thoroughly as I wanted to. Would you mind restating what the net effect on the 21 budget is of all of these things, because some of them, it just transfers over. And so from last year to this year, so I don't consider that as really having a net change, but a few of them change. For example, the task force facilitator you mentioned, the change from the
That's right.
reimbursement. So if you could just
Sure. So
that's
so
a-
if you take away those funds, they're just carried over, so they're not making any net impact on the general fund. The general fund decreases were $177,300. The non-carryover increases were $276,116. So the net impact to the city's budget revenue is a positive $98,816. It does have that $50,000 difference because of the adding the money for the facilitator.
Thank you.
All right, seeing no other hands, will the clerk call the vote?
Excuse me.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I thought my hand was up.
Nope, it just popped up. Go ahead.
Okay, I guess I was taking it down from the last time. Sorry about that. I would like the city manager to go over again the 50,000 for the police task force. I strongly support doing the police task force, and I know that we need to find some funds for the facilitator. I was a little surprised to see a proposal to take it out of the to use new money to do it, and you referred quickly to being able to save that money in another part of this police personnel budget. So could you just say that again, please?
Sure. In the next 2 weeks, I'll be bringing to you a holistic approach to some of the personnel numbers, because we have savings in a number of lines. And some of that has to do with how we're handling some of the requests by working with our unions and working with retirement incentives and a variety of aspects. I will be sending out some information. I hopefully get it posted tomorrow for the work session for next week. But the initial cut just for this section that would be coming before you would have a savings in the police budget of about $50,000, a little bit over $50,000. So it's actually a pretty good match for this expenditure of $50,000.
Okay, and the reason that you can't wait to balance the numbers later, why we have to approve a new $50,000 now and then make it up in the next budget amendment, just say why we need to do that.
So I would like you to act on what I'd be putting forward to you about the personnel numbers next week and the following week. So I don't want to anticipate your reaction.
So it's a matter. Go ahead, Mayor.
No, I was going to say, I think the other reason is that when we voted on the task force resolution that Councilman Searcy put forward, it was a sense from the council that we wanted to move on this very quickly. We asked the city manager to, ASAP work on an RFP. And given that budget amendments are 2 reading ordinances, getting it into this budget amendment, knowing that, this will probably be at least $50,000 moving forward.
So this is the first reading of 2 readings, and then you'll have that information for the second reading.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for clarifying the timing on that. I appreciate that.
Mm-hmm. Great. Terrific. All right. Seeing no hands, now I will ask the clerk to call the vote.
Councilmember Kovar.
Aye.
Councilmember Dvala.
Aye.
Councilmember Costick.
Aye.
Councilmember Siemens.
Aye.
Councilmember Smith.
Yes.
Councilmember Searcy.
Yes.
Mayor Stewart.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right. The next we have our emergency ordinance regarding appointments to various boards, commissions, and committees. Last week, Councilwoman Searcy did an awesome job taking us through that in our work session. And I just want to see, Councilwoman Searcy, do you have any comments or anything on this before I ask to have it moved?
I guess I don't need to have my hand raised if you've called on me. No, I just want to thank the city attorney and city staff for working on this and clarifying language in a couple of places. But I think it truly addressed the spirit of what the council discussed last week in terms of making sure that we have the discussion to make appointments as we see fit, as well as that we call out that we have the ability to make appointments in light of trying to increase diversity on our committees. So I appreciate all of the hard work everyone put in last week, and definitely looking forward to us moving this forward. So thank you.
Great. Councilmember Kovar, did you have a question before I asked for it to be moved?
Just a quick one, if you don't mind. So this does mean that we have to work during the intervening period in a more comprehensive way and along the lines of what the working group and others have discussed, coming up with a serious plan to address those diversity issues, right? And so the concept is, number one, we may still make some appointments, but number two, we need to, not in the next 2 council meetings, obviously, but that we really need to have that be one of our priorities going forward to finish in enough time to well in advance of the expiration of this freeze. Is that a fair way to?
That is absolutely correct. Between this resolution and what we passed previously with extending the deadlines, the term limits for current committee members, June is our deadline. Everything explodes come June if we don't get a process in place. So we have a hard, fast deadline of moving this forward well before then.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Thank you all for your work on this. Would someone like to move the emergency ordinance regarding appointments to various boards, commissions, and committees? Councilman Searcy moved. Do I have a second? Councilmember Kovar, second. Will the clerk call the vote?
Councilmember Kovar,
Aye.
Councilmember Dabala, Councilmember Costick,
Aye.
Councilmember Siemens,
Aye.
Councilmember Smith,
Yes.
Councilmember Searcy,
Aye.
Mayor Stewart.
Yes. Great. Our next voting item is a resolution adopting a committee code of conduct. And I know Councilwoman Dabala was working on this. Do you have any comments on this before having it moved as a resolution?
I think that just to say that I think that we've addressed some of the concerns that were raised last time we talked about this. So there, one question was the effective date for existing committee members. And the proposal from staff is to say December 1st, 2020. So that's pretty quick for existing members of committees to sign this. And then as people are appointed or reappointed, they would be asked to sign at that time. I'm not clear whether we wanted, okay, 3 things. We added in the whereases, just to remind people about a reporting process, including an option for independence and confidentiality. And I think that the city manager may want to outline very quickly what the process is that y'all are working on. But before you do that, 2 other things. On number 5, there's an edit to take out the reference to personal comments that we talked about that last time as something we wanted to do. And I was not clear, last but not least, whether Councilmember Costick was going to propose a change to number 9 on the code of conduct.
I was, and I'm having trouble finding it right now. So if you have it in front of you, I would love for you to.
I do not have your change in front of me, which is
okay. I will find it and propose it in a minute.
To you. And right now the whereas on reporting is a whereas, not a resolved. As the city manager, maybe we'll go to the city manager first and ask her to briefly fill us in on the status of developing a reporting process so that when committee members are asked to sign this, they'll know what it is they can do if they have an issue that they want to raise.
Sure. So one of the things we've been doing is identifying basically a grid or a schedule that would be presented to each committee member that says for this kind of complaint, here's what you can do. And so if it's a sexual harassment complaint or a discrimination complaint, it goes this way. If it's an ethics complaint, if it's a financial issue, if it's a kind of disorganized committee complaint, so a variety of different kinds of complaints would then can be submitted to the city. What I would like it to mostly be is that it would go to the deputy city manager, who would then alert and log that information in, that there would be, depending on the kind of complaint, different entities would work to assess and investigate that and make recommendations about next steps. The city attorney would likely be involved in most of these. There may be times when it comes back to the council for a determination about how to follow up with the committee. There are some things that are more private. There are others that are, more a discussion with a whole committee. And so we were sketching out this grid that would be provided. I think we're close, but I did want to work with some council members to refine it before it comes back and then gets shared with the committee members by December 1st.
And the suggestion of, I believe, is that this would not be adopted in the current resolution.
That's right.
But would be a separate effort that we would approve when it's ready, in whatever form it needs to be, whether it's a resolution or an ordinance. So not to try to hold this up to get the details straight, but to formally adopt it.
I'm not sure the exact formal adoption that's
Right.
needed. I think, there may be some changes that would be made, but it certainly would be part of the orientation packet for the committee members. And, it may be something that we work with it for a little while and maybe make some adjustments and then adopt it. So I think there's a little bit of work in progress, but we've got good recommendations and models from other jurisdictions about how to do this. And we also want to make sure that if somebody wants to make an anonymous complaint, that there's confidentiality provided to those folks as well. So we're really trying to give a number of options on this. One of the things that I do want to do is to identify positions that people contact, such as the city manager, as opposed to a phone number, as opposed to a person's individual name, because there are changes or the phone system changes or whatever, and I don't want to have a complaint drop through the cracks. And so this would say, here's how you would file your complaint, here's the response that you get and what kind of time frame that is. And if there was some problem, you would find out very quickly so that you could follow up with the next level of investigator or report recipient.
Okay, so again, not to try to put it into this right now, but to know that the work is in process.
That's right.
And it's pretty far along, actually.
It's pretty far along, yes.
Can we back up for a moment to Councilmember Costick, and then maybe we're ready to move this and vote on it?
Yes, I think could I have Councilman Costick move this as an amendment since the rest of the council hasn't necessarily seen it?
Okay.
So let's just hold that. And then I have Councilmember Kovar, do you have a question before we move the resolution?
I can do it at whatever point you suggest.
All right. Why don't you do it now since you're talking?
Two things. One, we're potentially approving this resolution tonight with this code of conduct, but understanding that there's an important piece of the process to be developed later, and based on what the city manager just said, and potentially other input from us and others. And so one concern I have is if that process just doesn't get completed by December 1st, and we got 2 meetings, we're probably not going to do it then, and then it's after the election, and who knows, it's a tempestuous national election, et cetera. I just want to make sure that we don't adopt something that says we're going to do this by December 1st, and then we just can't do it. Seems like an easy thing to just do technically. If it isn't available yet, that we would move the date. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is, and you and I have talked about this, Ms. Ludlow, and I've mentioned it to Councilmember Duvall also. There is this language in there about the potential for an independent option, and so I think that's the question. And I think and we don't have to have this fully resolved now, but I'm just going to suggest that I think it might be necessary. I think for some of the categories that were just mentioned, if it's a conflict of interest matter, it could go before the Ethics Commission. If it's something about the committee not working well, just in a very nuts and bolts way, I think, as you mentioned, perhaps that would go to the deputy city manager, et cetera. But where there's an allegation that is, let's say, racial in nature, people may not feel comfortable going with a process that is within the city. And so when I mentioned independent, that's what I was thinking about. And I know there are models that exist, and probably they cost something more, but where there could be outside entities that would be available to help vet or investigate something like that. So to me, that's something we ought to seriously think about, including within the general grid. Looked as fine as far as it went, but that was the one piece that I thought wasn't fully addressed there. And I'm not saying that we have to resolve that now, but I think that's something that we ought to consider.
Okay, thank you. Will someone like to move the resolution? Councilmember Duvall, do I have a second? Councilman Searcy. All right, Councilman Costick, do you want to move your amendment?
I will, yes. I move that we add to the Code of Conduct, number 9 at the very end. It says, as a committee member, it is my responsibility to report actions of individual members that appear to be in violation of the Code of Conduct. And I move that we add, and to cooperate in any investigation of an alleged violation, which was a recommendation from a resident who looked at this and thought that would be a useful addition. And the city attorney also had indicated that that was something he thought would be a useful addition as well.
Great, thank you. Do I have a second for that amendment? Okay, great. Councilman Duvall, a second. Any discussion or comment on the amendment?
I just have a question. What happens if a committee member doesn't help with an investigation? Are they automatically just kicked off the committee, or?
My sense, at least in proposing this, is that that would then be considered a violation of the Code of Conduct, like any other violation of anything else that's listed there. And so it would then be considered to be sort of another thing that would be considered in lieu of whatever consequences there are for that action.
And the same would cover if committee members all didn't, let's say you have 3 committee members and only 2 come forward, or 3 committee members know about an action, only 2 come forward. The 3rd committee member, they would also be subject to some type of sanction or being kicked off the committee.
It's a good question. I mean, I to me, that gets a little more at actually a question I have separate from this, which is about number 10 in terms of the reporting procedures. But I don't necessarily think that would apply so much to the amendment to cooperate with an investigation. It seems more like that would be in the reporting of something that should have been reported. But I think that you raise a very good point, that that's something we should consider.
All right, thank you.
Okay, yeah, Councilman Searcy.
Sorry, I just wanted to chime in on that. So I think, Councilmember Smith, to your point, if that 3rd person was aware of some wrongdoing and did not report it, and through the results of an investigation should have reported it, then they would be subject to the requirement to report an activity. So they would be subject to the same penalties as someone who actually committed the action. And I think, to Councilmember Kostick's point of making sure that folks are willing to, collaborate and actually help out in an investigation. That is, from the perspective of, let's say there's a bad act, right? You have someone who's come forward, they reported the bad act. There were 5 other people in the room during the bad act. And the person who reported is now, you have people following up, and everyone else that was in the room is saying, I don't want anything to do with it. I'm not a part of this. Then that would mean that all of those other 5 folks that were in the room that were there, and all you're asking them to do is to tell you and kind of collaborate and participate in the investigation. They choose not to do so, then they would be subject as well. So I think that's the nuance.
That's good.
And can I just say something that, again, the point of this is to set our expectations, to let people know what the standards are. Going back to some of the comments people made earlier this evening about expecting in Tacoma Park that we will treat each other with respect and describe our differences in policy terms or in program terms and not in personal terms. So it's important to be clear what happens if, but for me, the main reason to be doing this is to set the expectations in the first place. So I just didn't want to lose sight of that bigger point as we go to vote for this.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Councilman Costa, did you say you had another question?
I do have another question, but do you want to, it's separate from this. So if you want to move forward and vote on the amendment, then,
okay.
Yeah.
So can the clerk call the vote on the amendment?
On the amendment, Councilmember Kovar.
Aye.
Councilmember Dabala.
Yes.
Councilmember Kostick.
Aye.
Councilmember Siemens.
Aye.
Councilmember Smith.
Yes.
Councilmember Searcy.
Aye.
Mayor Stewart.
Yes. Okay, and I think our city attorney is logging in now so that we can get just a clarification on the point just made. And if Councilman Kostick, if you have, I see Councilmember Kovar's hand up, if you all have questions that might.
One question.
Oh, and we have the
city attorney could answer this question. So I'm just looking at the very last resolve clause, and this is what I was referring to before about the date. So it says current members of city boards, commissions, committees, and task forces shall sign this code of conduct on or before December 1st, 2020, in order to remain in good standing as a member of their respective committee. So it is possible that we wouldn't have the reporting process ready by December 1st. And if we didn't, is that date just ignored, or do we have to include language in there mentioning that possibility? That's the question I have. If we don't have the reporting process worked out and December 1st rolls around, is it just, okay, fine, they don't have to sign it until we do work that out, or do we need to worry about that?
So are you, I'm sorry, are you making an amendment? Because personally, I'm not sure that I'm troubled by the gap, but are you suggesting we should fix that?
I'm just wondering if we should. I'd like to hear what the city attorney has to say about that. So let's just assume that despite our best efforts, and I agree that the city manager's initial efforts are good on this, and we have to do a little more, but if we get to December 1st and that reporting process hasn't been agreed to, I don't think at that stage we would want to ask people to sign something without knowing what that reporting process was. And is it fine just to say, okay, don't worry about it, you don't have to sign it. When we get around to it, we'll get around to it, or do we have to say something in the resolution? That's all I'm asking. And I can hear from it.
I think as a city attorney, I'm not sure we can hear you.
You don't seem to be able to hear from me.
No, we can't hear you.
Okay.
Microphone plugged in?
Do we even have him?
No.
I don't even see him.
He's here.
Oh, there he is.
He's here. He's
here.
talking. We just
hear
can't hear him, even when the mic, the mute button is off.
Yeah.
I do think we'll be I think we will have enough of a code reporting system in place. This is not a major issue, but when we've had other situations, and obviously if the city attorney can get online, that'll be good. It has not seemed to cause a problem, and we could just wait for the signature.
Okay, so we want to put on the table, let's see, Councilman Costick, you also had your hand up. Did you have another question?
Yeah, my question is actually related to something similar. When I had glanced at this earlier, I thought that there would be something more on number 10, where we have reporting procedures. And is it correct to say that the idea is that this will be filled in the future, and that's not necessarily something that council needs to vote on? That's more of an administrative action? Or I guess I was confused about how that was going to be handled.
I think that it went back and forth at the last minute, so that's why it kind of just looks like a blank, because the grid had been put up on here, and I said no because it hadn't finished having the discussions with everyone. So I think, you may just want to put on this, even in some kind of brackets, the code of the reporting procedures will be developed before this has been signed, or something like that. I mean, you just may want a sentence to that effect of someplace.
Mm-hmm.
And in the code of,
Can you speak now? Oh,
no, I think we lost you again.
Yes, I mean, it makes sense to me to have some sort of language there, either in brackets or even just in the text itself, that says the city will develop procedures that I will be able to review in the future, or something like that.
Sorry, I'm just pulling it up.
are we looking for words now?
Yeah, we could just add number 10 could just be, reporting procedures will be developed and shared prior to signing of the code of conduct. That,
Since this is the code of conduct, it would, I think, fit better in the resolution. But if you want to have it literally in the code of conduct, it would be, I will follow reporting procedures as they've been developed.
okay, I will follow reporting procedures. Would you say, Councilman DeBala,
as developed by the city?
By the city, okay. I will follow recording procedures as developed by the city.
And when we do develop those procedures, I would just ask that we don't necessarily, I don't know, I'm just thinking about there being a circumstance where, to me, it seems like people should report violations they see happen where there is inappropriate behavior towards someone else. But if someone themselves does not feel comfortable reporting, I don't necessarily want that person to risk sanction because they didn't report something. So I just want to make sure that there's no, just be careful in the language, I guess, in the development of that. But I think that is fine in terms of what's being proposed here.
Okay, so that's an amendment. So I'm going to say Councilman DeBala moved it and Councilman Costa seconded it. Is that okay? So it says, I will, I can't read my handwriting, so I'll follow reporting procedures as developed by the city.
Or I will make use of, because then you don't have to.
I will make use of, I will.
Taking into account Councilmember Costick's point just now.
I will make.
I'm sorry, I would have had this ready, but I didn't realize we needed to do this.
Okay, I will make use of, all right, so scratch, wait, we had an amendment on the table. And so now we're amending the amendment. And so it's, I will make use of the reporting procedures as developed by the city. Councilman DeBala is amending her own amendment. Councilman Costick, are you good with that amendment since you seconded it? So I think since that's the case, the amendment that can be on the table is I will make use of the reporting procedure as developed by the city. Any other comments on that amendment or change? All right. Seeing none, yeah, Councilman Kovar, sorry.
So, and I'm sorry if I'm not quite following this, but so is the council going to have the ability to approve the reporting process, or is that considered to be an administrative or regulatory function for the staff?
I think it can go either way. If you want December 1st, it probably needs to be more of an administrative. I mean, it's not going to be an administrative regulation. It would simply be
administrative
something. Does Ms. Carpenter have a proposal? I see you ready to say something.
I just wonder if the council feels it should approve formally the reporting process, then why are you adopting the code of conduct without it? I mean, if you have to take a separate action before it can go into effect, that I'm just wondering that if you want to get that developed before you vote on this.
So there would be an opportunity at late in November to act, I suppose, or there may be an opportunity to do the best we can within the next 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm. And I guess it was my understanding from the work session we had on this a few weeks ago that the council felt some urgency to get a code of conduct in place. And that during that work session, we had talked about and agreed to working on knowing that the reporting was going to take some time. Now, if members of the council want to rethink that, that's fine. But the work session we had a couple of weeks ago, I think there was urgency to getting the code of conduct in place. I would also just say I would like personally to review and be able to comment on the procedure. However, I do believe having procedures like that be able to change as we see how systems work and we can react to things rather than have it be something that has to come back to a council for a vote is more appropriate. So I would actually not want it in this resolution specifically, but referenced, and have the council be able to provide input on the reporting procedures, but not have to vote on them to set that precedent for the future. And I'm seeing Councilwoman DeBala and Circe nodding their heads. So I'm going to take it that they agree with that. So, I mean, other people can, I see Councilmember Kovar and Circe, your hands are up. So I don't know if you want to comment on that.
I think I agree that it should be done administratively. I guess the the problem is if I don't like them, what happens, but I'll have to live with that, I guess.
All right, so I think on the table we still have the amendment to number 10 to clarify, I will make use of reporting procedures as developed by the city. Will the clerk, I think, unless we have any more comments on that, will the clerk call the vote on that amendment?
Councilmember Kovar.
Aye.
Councilmember DeBala.
Aye.
Councilmember Costick. Councilmember Siemens.
Aye.
Councilmember Smith.
Yes.
Councilmember Circe.
Yes.
Mayor Stewart.
Yes. Okay. So for the city attorney, I think we resolved on our own one issue, but just to clarify, another issue that we had a conversation on before was on number 9. We had a conversation and we just want to make sure we understand it correctly, where in number 9, it talks about having the responsibility. I understand that I may be sanctioned removed as a member in good standing if I violate one. As a committee member, it is my responsibility to report actions of individual members that appear in violation. And we just also added to that, thanks to Councilman Costick, also to participate in investigations. And so the question that arose, if I remember correctly, is what happens if someone does not report, or if someone does not want to participate in an investigation? Are they considered in violation of the code of conduct?
Well, I would say in both of those circumstances, there is going to be a factual component, and not to prejudge a situation, I would say it was factually dependent, but I would say that the failure to report, if it is demonstrated, for example, that it was knowing and willful or something like that, I think that could be judged to be a sanctionable action, as well as failure to cooperate. I'm hard pressed to think of a circumstance where someone would be find themselves in a situation where they're asked to cooperate and they simply don't. It would be something other than knowing or willful. I mean, maybe they just need the message or something like that. Yeah, I don't know, but I think that those could both very easily be sanctionable actions. And I think that if they were not, there would be no point in having those provisions in the code of conduct, because the whole idea is to ensure the group is working together on the board commissioner committee, and ensure that the code of conduct has some meaning.
Thank you. Does that help and clarify and answer people's questions? Okay.
And since the city attorney's technology is working, would you mind just opining on this other question in the last resolve clause? If we get to December 1st and the reporting process has not been worked out, do we need to say on or before December 1st or later if the reporting process has not been developed, or is it just assumed if it isn't developed? Because the code is less meaningful if the reporting process hasn't been worked out. And so
sure,
we just need to clarify that December 1st. Maybe it's just maybe I'm obsessing about a technical thing. I don't know, but I'm sorry. What is how did December 1st come about? Is that the effective date, or is that that's the date by which the committee member has to sign the code in order to remain in good standing? And my only question is, we have this code, but if we don't, for whatever set of reasons, don't have the reporting process worked out yet, by then what would happen?
Well, so I would say that, obviously in a perfect world, all of this would be done at the same time, and we'd be able to roll it out. But, we're dealing with a situation where it's not a perfect world. And so if the council's will is that we need to get this in place and get moving, then we can deal with the other part of it on the back end. I did hear the most recent discussion about the flexibility aspect of it, and the idea that you can build in, a rudimentary reporting process, expand on it, change it, alter it depending on what you find works and what is appropriate thing. And I would say that, the city on an administrative side, there are various models that the city would have through its HR system and otherwise that it could utilize as an example, in the event, let's say something happens on December 1st, that we could grab and use as, okay, well, this is going to be the example we're going to use until we get this ironed out. And that would be a reasonable approach to addressing the situation.
Okay. Any other discussion or questions? All right, seeing none, I will ask the clerk to call the vote on the resolution as amended.
Councilmember Kovar.
Aye.
Councilmember Dabala.
Yes.
Councilmember Costick.
Yes.
Councilmember Siemens,
Aye.
Councilmember Smith,
Yes.
Councilmember Searcy,
Yes.
Mayor Stewart.
Yes. Okay, that takes care of our voting items. Thank you to the city attorney for hopping on and joining us to clarify those questions. We will now move to our work session, and our first one up is an update on our climate change resolution action, and we're going to be joined by Gina Mathias, our sustainability manager. So I just want to say I was just given my kettle corn popcorn from the Crossroads Farmers Market that I got today. So just a plug for the farmers market again.
So I'm going to hear some crunching while I go through my presentation.
Yeah, I'll put myself on mute.
Do I need to share, or will you pull up my my presentation, Jesse or John?
What's your preference, Gina? You can share if you want.
Okay. Actually, I don't think I do have that option.
I will give you that option.
Okay.
Just give me a sec. Sorry. Now I think you should have the option. Nothing. Okay.
No. I have the option to stop the recording. Oh, here it is. Got it.
Okay,
all
good.
right. I'm just going to move this so I'm actually looking at the camera. So I wanted to just start with where we have been as a refresher on what has happened in the city for sustainability in the past few years. We had the 2014 Sustainable Energy Action Plan. Of course, this was not actually the city's first sustainability or climate plan, but this is where the city hired a full-time staff person to work on implementing climate action in the city. And that plan had 17 key strategies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We implemented most of them that were feasible to implement. Most of them were based on voluntary programs. And then we had the Climate Emergency Declaration in 2019. We worked with the CADMIS group on developing recommendations and a new sustainability and climate action plan, a resiliency plan, and recommendations for resiliency. And then, of course, a few months ago, the emergency response framework that was adopted in or passed in March of this year. And the emissions from the city are split. The bulk of the emissions come from our buildings, a combination of residential and commercial buildings, and the transportation in the city. A very small amount of emissions are coming from other sources, including waste and fugitive emissions, of course. An overview reminder of or update of what has been going on since our last meeting in March. One of the largest things that I heard from council and from residents when we were looking at adopting this framework and what was going to be really important for Takoma Park to do in order to meet its goals was to coordinate with Montgomery County and the state and the region, because the work that's being done at the county affects us and is going to help us meet our goals the same way us meeting our goals will help the county. And so there has been a lot of work being done over the past year at the county level And we are participating in those processes to both advocate for what's being done at the county to be as strong and aggressive as possible and as feasible, and for those policies and programs to hopefully be implemented in ways that Tacoma Park can benefit from them. Some of those policies include building energy performance standards, which is one of the policies that's also in Tacoma Park's framework. The county is moving forward in that process to adopt building energy performance standards. Of course, at the county, they'll be implementing at a large scale. And so there will be very few buildings in Tacoma Park that would be subject to those if the county council does adopt those this year or in 21. Green Building Code is moving forward. So the 2018 International Green Construction Code is being adopted at the county level, which is wonderful since they handle our building codes. This will impact any new building in Tacoma Park, and this is the best way for us to get those strong building codes. And we did have the city send a formal letter supporting the adoption of the 2018 Green Building Codes, the IGCC. There's also new incentives for green building coming out of the county, which is also something that businesses and new building in Tacoma Park will be able to take advantage of. There'll be more details shared about what those incentives for green building are, and that will be shared with all of the businesses in the city, and hopefully that provides a lot of incentive for going that extra step. The climate planning process at Montgomery County is still moving along. They do have a target to have the plan available by the end of the year, so I'm very hopeful that there's going to be a lot of good information and movement on getting this county-wide plan adopted very soon. And I think once that whole plan is together, we'll be in a good place to then look at exactly where it is that we need to go as the city and what we can do with the county. The other thing that is still going on, of course, is education and outreach planning. I am working with the county and MWCOG partners and the region on education and outreach. So there is an informal group of us sustainability managers and coordinators that get on the phone with each other and plan things like outreach on Energy Awareness Month and share ideas, share tips, things like that. The climate planning, I forgot to also mention, is happening at the regional level. So it's not just Montgomery County doing these climate plans, it's also happening with MWCOG. And so I've been a part of that process, advocating for the region-wide goals to be reflective of Tacoma Park schools and Montgomery County schools. And I expect that we already have drafts of the regional climate plan from MWCOG that's gone through both the Built Energy and Environment Action Committee, which I chair, and to CEPC, the legislative body. So we will, I don't know, maybe Cindy can remind me if that was formally adopted or if it'll be formally voted and adopted on in a meeting by the end of the year.
Is that a pause? Is that a pause for me to answer that question?
Yeah, I can't remember if CEPC.
The regional climate planning goals for COG have gone to the COG board for their October meeting for formal approval.
Yeah, it'll be this Wednesday.
Great.
Right.
I just looked at it today. Actually, we just got our agenda packets today. I'm voting on it on Wednesday.
Great.
Yeah, we got the briefing at the CAO meeting today too.
Good. So my only comment I would say about the COG plan is while I think it would be great if the whole region could have a net zero goal by 2035, or as the county states, 100% emission reduction. they have to consider all of the jurisdictions involved in the heavy lift. And so I am glad to see how aggressive they did make the goal, which I believe is 80% reduction. So it is still a very aggressive goal. And I think that the regional resources and collaboration that'll help meet that goal is going to help Tacoma Park a lot. And then the last item of advocacy and coordination that's been going on is, of course, community choice aggregation, but that unfortunately didn't get to its final vote due to the coronavirus. And so I don't know yet if it will be taken up or when it'll be taken up, but I know that it will be, it's not gone. It's just paused for now. But that is the other piece of regional collaboration that would really help Tacoma Park achieve its goals a lot faster and a lot easier. The other big part of the framework is to develop city programs and policies, and the categories that we'll be talking about again in a little bit will be buildings, transportation, renewable energy, the fossil fuel free community, and trees and sequestration. And so I'll go into a little bit more on what my thoughts are in the coming slides. So I will admit that the COVID shutdown really has impacted where we are in the timeline. Council asked to have some policy implementation recommendations and plans in September, and the shutdown has affected that. And I think it also has required some serious reconsideration of how things need to be implemented, because we don't yet know what the economic impacts of COVID are going to be. We know that they're bad, and we don't know how bad they're going to get. And so any policy, any even voluntary program has to really take that into consideration and take those financial considerations and the stress that people are under in a new way. And as we move forward in looking at how to implement these policies, how to implement different programs to help us get to net zero by 2035, that will be front and center. But that doesn't mean that all activity is stopped. There's actually been quite a bit going on. And I just talked a lot about what's been going on as we work on collaboration and advocacy with the county and the region. There's also been reporting done as we're required to do to the Carbon Disclosure Project, and that satisfies our requirements for the Global Covenant of Mayors. And we do that each year, our greenhouse gas inventory, and the reporting gets more arduous every year. Longer and longer, they ask more and more questions. We also are participating in a forestry protocol cohort, which is being organized by WRI, World Resources Institute, and ICLEI, and Urban Sustainability Directors Network has helped. And we're doing this with Montgomery County and MWCOG. And I'm really excited about this because I think a lot of the residents are going to be really excited, because this is going to enable us to integrate trees into our greenhouse gas inventory. And so we'll be able to follow a protocol, an officially recognized protocol, to say how much sequestration power our urban forest has, and also look at, well, what happens if we lose this much, and what happens if we gain this much, and really build that into our efforts to get to net zero. And I know that's something that residents have been wanting to see. And so I'm really excited to have this opportunity to do it in a scientific way with this protocol that's been developed. We also applied for our recertification from Sustainable Maryland, and you can watch the ceremony on Friday morning with the MML conference. I can't say anything, but watch the ceremony. You'll see if we got recertified or not. And I've also been—
You say it would be worth getting up on Friday morning.
Yeah, it's 8:30. Should be up by then. Racial equity, I've been doing a training. It's through the Urban Sustainability Directors Network. It's was created by GARE. So it's a training module that should really sort of parallel what some of the other members of staff have been going through. And that's going to be available in future years too. So we have opportunities to share what we've been learning with other staff members. And I'm hoping to utilize a lot of this in the climate action planning that we'll be doing going forward. We have sustainability grants available. I'm going to go over those in just a moment. And our curbside EV charging permit is now live. So the sustainability grants, this is what I think I would really like to have all of you pay attention to, because I think that this is important to let people know. And I'll be working with Donna on a press release and getting this information out there. I've been working on getting the applications working. Their applications are all online and multilingual, so they're in English and Spanish. We have a sustainability grant for residents, businesses, and multifamily buildings. For residents, it's in two parts. Any resident can get a one-time rebate up to $500 that's based on energy efficiency improvements that they've made. So per kilowatt hour or per therm annual estimated savings. So for example, if you upgrade your furnace to a high efficiency heat pump, we can figure out what the annual energy savings are, and you can get up to $500 for that. For anyone who qualifies low to moderate income, they can have a whole home energy efficiency makeover at no cost. And that's the same program that's been available for a number of years, that's still available for people. And now is the perfect time as people are heading into winter. We're all going to be home all the time. We need to make sure our houses are energy efficient. So let people know that's available. Businesses, this is new, can get a grant up to $9,500 per grant project. And so this is not necessarily a one-time grant for a business. They might have several projects over several years that they'll be doing. And this can cover equipment changes. So refrigeration, that's a really big use of energy in a business. And I would love to see some refrigeration swap outs, HVAC improvements, insulation, weatherization, solar panels, and EV charging. So this covers some sustainability issues, not necessarily just energy use reduction. This would be considered overall reduction in emissions and increase in sustainability for businesses. And the same for multifamily buildings. The multifamily buildings program has been around for a couple of years, but we need to remind people that it is available. And I have been working with Grace, and she has been talking with multifamily buildings, which is great. We have a couple that are interested in taking advantage of the grants. And so I'm hoping that we can get them some projects going soon. The electric vehicle charging in the right of way is a new permit that is available for residents who have street parking. They do not have off-street parking, so no parking pad, garage, driveway. And they have an area near their house where there's street parking. They can tie into their own electric meter and place a level 1 or level 2 EV charger in that right-of-way strip next to the curb. There are a lot of requirements that need to be met in order to have something installed in the right-of-way in terms of where it's placed, what it looks like, what size it is. Tree permits and historic area work permits are still required. We don't want to see any trees impacted by this. We don't want to, we need to make sure that historic area work permits are obtained, as well as county electrical EV permitting. But I am coordinating with the county on the electrical permit side, and we've also talked with the Historic Commission, and largely they plan to do administrative approvals for EV charging in the historic district, which will make things hopefully go very quickly for people. We are going to ensure that, or we are going to require that the units are insured. And right now, the way that the parking regulations are written for the city and for Montgomery County, the parking is not guaranteed in front of a residential EV charger in the right of way. This, I'm guessing, will be something that we need to come back to rather quickly. But for right now, that's how it is. And I'm happy to stop and pause if anyone has any questions. This is rather new.
I see. Oh, sorry. Sorry. Councilman Costick has a question, and Councilman Searcy.
Yeah, thank you. I just had a question about the electrical vehicle charging. You noted very briefly, and I was just trying to look it up on the website, that the person needs to not have off-street parking. Is that correct? I was just wondering if there might be a situation where, especially with an accessory dwelling unit, there might be a consideration of allowing for it, even if there is some off-street parking for other residents who are living there.
Yeah, so we do state that if there is a situation that is not covered, that we'll consider it.
Okay.
One of the downsides of being in the first wave of these types of things is there's just not a lot of best practices. I've called some of the other cities that are doing this. Tacoma, Washington is one, and they don't have any advice or any best practices to share yet because they don't have enough information. And so as we come across those individual scenarios or requests, I think absolutely we can consider them.
Yeah, I think it would be good to just make sure situations like that, as well as maybe a smaller multifamily building that might not have as much capacity within their parking lot, or might not at this current time have chargers within the parking lot. It would be good to be able to offer those opportunities to people. And I think also I'd love to look into allowing some type of priority parking then in those locations so that people can actually charge their cars. So thank you very much.
Yes, I have been getting some suggestions from people on how to handle or how they think that they would like us to handle the parking and the trying to prevent icing of the stations, but also being sensitive to, we're not just reserving street parking spots. So that'll be a very different conversation.
Mm-hmm. Great. Councilman Searcy?
Thank you so much. So I want to make sure I understand. So is it the individual property owner can request to have the station?
Yeah, so the homeowner or property owner will own the station, they buy the station, they pay for the installation and the operation of it. And so the only thing the city is doing is allowing them to place it in that right of way.
Okay, so it wouldn't be the case, for example, that a neighbor could just choose to park there and try to charge their car, right? There would be a mechanism for that to not happen, right?
Yeah, so people can lock their stations. They'll be allowed to put a lockbox on them or some other mechanism so that they can't just be used by the public. But I also know that there are some neighbors that want to do a cooperative where they share the cost and allow anyone on the street to use it. So I anticipate there might be some of both.
Okay. And then has there been any conversation about, what happens should we decide to do something different with the right of way, right? So let's say, for example, currently there is no sidewalk. It's the city's right of way, and someone has installed a station, and we now want to install a sidewalk or plant new trees or lots of things that we tend to want to do in the right of way. So is there any requirements around what happens, if you allow a resident to install a station in the city's right of way and we decide to do something different with the right of way?
Yeah, so before the permit is issued, we'll have to work with the plans for sidewalks and make sure that we don't have anything known, planned, of course, for the foreseeable future. The way that we're going to guide people in placement of the stations will hopefully allow, so if there are needs to do something in that right of way, the station can be temporarily moved and then put back. Or put back in a way that allows them to still use it, even if it's not exactly where it used to be.
It would be helpful when we're thinking about these kinds of policies to just triple check with the, with the city attorney about our legal requirements and start to think about how things like this might impact the long-term cost of our different types of right-of-way projects over time. So if something like this were to be widely adopted, which is possible that it could be, and then in places where we may want to do things like more sidewalk projects or, reclaim the right-of-way for public space purposes or things like that, that might actually impact the right-of-way. If we are then going to be required to pay to move these things or replace these things or kind of reconfigure them, then that might have some substantial impacts on our right-of-way costs over time. So, or our infrastructure projects over time. So that's just something else that we may want to just make sure that we can kind of narrow down before we really start to go live with allowing folks to put them up. I think it's a great idea. I just want to make sure that we understand the liability implications and some of the cost implications to the city as a result of sidewalk projects and things like that down the line.
Absolutely. And so we did have the city attorney review this. He wrote the liability and indemnification agreement that users will have to sign and agree to for us. And so he did go through that review process. And in terms of the agreement, it also does state that it may have to be removed. And so if something has to happen in the right of way, the owner is responsible. They're not guaranteed the spot. It's we're granting it, but it's not guaranteed.
Okay. So yes, there is a liability piece. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Right. It's similar to many of the other things that somebody might have a permit for in the right of way. So this has been a standard process. The other thing that I think is just really great, and this is by having Gina in the Public Works Department, she's also very familiar with everything that might be going on in the rights of way. So, and we have close relationships, obviously, between Public Works and planning and other entities. So it helps to be a small city in this regard. So we're not putting something where we're just about ready to move it.
And to that point too about liability, we are very clear that if their unit is damaged, it is their responsibility. So let's say a drunk driver hits it. Well, that's not the city's fault. That is the purpose of them having insurance.
Perfect. Thank you.
Councilmember Smith.
Gina, this is very, very interesting. I appreciate this presentation on the right-of-way chargers. So do you have an estimate on how much each charger would cost? One. Two, is any type of easement required with the homeowner and the jurisdiction? Because you are going to, I guess, pull electric from the home into the device. And then finally, if you install one of these devices, does the homeowner get some type of discount on existing energy usage, or that hasn't been considered yet?
Yeah, so these would be private chargers. They're not city or public chargers. So this would be for let's say a homeowner who wants to install their own car charger for their own personal use. And so they'll be tapping into their own electric panel and paying for their own usage of it. And so there won't need to be any sort of discount or easement because of that.
Well, I was thinking that because it's taking gas cars off the road, that there might be some type of incentive or benefit with actual, usage of other energy.
I'm not planning that right now. that's,
Because that's the goal, right? So I
it
mean,
is the goal. I mean, I'm trying to, so operating an electric car is cheaper than operating a gas car. And so right there, there's a built-in incentive for people to charge at home because it's the cheapest way to charge, and it's cheaper to operate an electric car than a gas car. And so I don't think that the city, other than allowing for the permit, needs to use budget towards further incenting electric vehicle adoption. There are, of course, rebates for purchasing an electric car available, but I hadn't really thought that we needed to do more than that.
so does it take a lot of energy to operate the actual charger or, okay.
No.
And then finally, what's the cost?
So it depends on the installation. You can literally put in a regular household outlet just there by the curb and do that for the cost of an electrician to run the line. Or you can buy a $1,000 level 2 charger. There are rebates available for buying those level 2 chargers. And so the cost can vary a lot depending on how fancy a homeowner, resident wants to get with what charger they put in. My house, I bought a portable charging cord and put in a heavy duty outlet so I get a level 2 charge, but I didn't have to pay for a really expensive charging unit. So I got away with about $500 in cost.
All right, thank you, Gina. You're doing excellent work.
Great. Next, we have Councilmember Coe.
Did you say me? Yeah. Just one question.
Councilmember Kovar, yes.
Yeah, just one question. Gina, if you don't mind. So on the parking in front of people's homes, I think there's a tendency for people to feel that the space in front of their home is sort of reserved for them. It's not really true because in many streets you can only park on one side, so the people who park on the other side don't have that. Some people don't have driveways, of course, also. But even if this was done in a way where it was shared cooperatively by a group of people, I think what you're saying is there's nothing to stop someone else, if they have a permit, say, for the area, if that's required, from parking in front of that spot, not charging, just parking there on the weekend for 48 hours, and the people wouldn't be able to charge it. Is that accurate?
That's accurate.
Okay. So if people were going to invest in this, they would have to do it with the understanding that they might not always have access to it.
As it is currently, and I think that you'll be hearing about this soon on what some recommendations are on how to address trying to prevent, how to balance we don't want icing of this blocking of the stations. For those not familiar with the lingo, when a combustion vehicle parks in front of a charging station and blocks it, it's called icing. We don't want to see those stations iced, but we also recognize that there's going to be a lot of feelings about essentially having reserved parking spots and how to handle that in a fair way.
There's also the situation that we have across the city where people don't park on the street with their car all the time. They go to work or they do other things. And so, we do try to also find a balance so that, because parking takes up valuable real estate in the city. And,
yeah, the only concern I have is that somebody might think, oh, I'm going on a trip this weekend, I'll charge it sometime on Saturday. And then there's a car parked there the whole time.
I
right?
understand.
Yeah.
I'm sure that people will put little signs that say, please don't park here, it's on Saturday or whatever it is.
Right.
I don't want to get caught up in this conversation because I could actually talk about this for a good hour without a break on the parking. I have a lot of thoughts about it. So I will try to reserve those details for another time. But I do really look forward to that. And right now I only have one resident who I know is actively pursuing a permit. So I do think that we have a little time before we have to get something on the books officially.
All right, thank you.
But this program is available now if someone wants to apply for it?
Yes, it is live on the website under the permits page. And I have to iron out a few kinks in the application. And as soon as those kinks are, probably tomorrow, I will be working to do a press release. Great. So this is the big question I think most of our public commenters are probably thinking about, and I know on our community members and you are thinking about, is how are we going to get to some real implementation of the policies that were in the framework? And how do we do that during COVID? And this is where I think we can go, is to do print mailers to every mailbox in the city. We can utilize the city newsletter specials. We've done special editions in the newsletter before for sustainability. So I think that's a good use of that resource. We can also consider doing some other type of mailing and being very thoughtful how those mailings are put forth. And so I want to be careful about how we do what we put in people's mailboxes. I'm taking a cue from the county, and I think that while since I came on staff, have always made myself available to residents to coach them on energy use and have advertised those types of services for coaching them through their energy audits, talking them through their options, doing some office hours to talk about the climate work, talk about the climate plan, just sort of more of a, I think having office hours will encourage people to sign up to talk about specific topics. And so that's something I would like to start doing in the next month. The big bulk of how we get to this community-driven recommendation, I think, has to come from community sessions for each framework strategy. Ideally, these would have been done in person, and ideally we would have been doing them over the last few months in people's houses and community centers, at churches and restaurants. It's going to have to be online, and I think we can do it online, and I think that we can take what some other communities I've been seeing do with live translation, with different resources available during these sessions, and really take advantage of this moment where everyone now is comfortable going online. We can do them at different times of day, different days of the week. We can invite experts from around the country in a way that we would not have been able to do before, and get these experts who have expertise and knowledge in very specific policies to come talk with us and talk with the community about how things can be implemented in Takoma Park, answer questions, and help our community come up with the recommendations on implementation and the implementation plans themselves that will come to council. When I say community sessions, I think we need a lot of them, not just 4 or 5, dozens, because each topic in the framework is made up of so many different topics. If we talk about transportation, as Casey knows, it's not just public transportation. It's modal transportation. We've got EVs, we've got scooters, bicycles, we have buses, trains, the idea of circulating shuttles. There's just so much there to dig into that we'll need to have lots of these community sessions. And I said this about the mailing, but I think the community sessions they need to be very thoughtful and very carefully planned. And so we are not just hearing from the same 20 people that I always hear from. I have a core group of residents that are very supportive and very smart, but we need to hear from everybody else too. And I think the way that the community sessions are planned in a deliberate way, we can hear from more of the community. And the last part of how we can get to more of the community would be through surveys, taking a cue from the efforts to hear from people in the New Hampshire Avenue Recreation Center, and even community-based information centers. This could be like the kiosks you see at park trailheads, where you just have the information where people are going to be walking anyway. Things like what the bulletin boards at the community center used to do. We can't use that anymore, so we have to take the bulletin board to the community. And so this is where we are. What's next? The next item of action, I think, in the, well, what's been going on since we all have been working remotely, is establishing the Sustainability Assistance Fund. This is in the framework. We already have the direction from council to establish this. So I'll be working on getting that established to ensure that the budget we have to help low-income residents and businesses is protected. Planning these community sessions and working on establishing the pilot program. And so while I do very strongly think that we are past the time of voluntary action, what we do need is to still include voluntary action as part of the solution to pilot benchmarking and to use the pilot to test different implementation options. And so a lot of what I heard from council back in the late winter was wanting to have more data and wanting to test out some of these different policy options. And we can do this through different pilot tests. The benchmarking is something that's been going on around the country in various ways. Let's test that out on our small buildings. That's where a little bit of the unknown is. And use that information to inform the implementation recommendations. And lastly, I'll be getting those implementation recommendations in 21, not in 2020. That's it.
Terrific. Thank you so much for that. I'm going to ask my colleagues, I don't know if people are raising their hand again or if some of these are old hands, but let me know. One question I had, if we could go back to the community engagement piece. One of the things that I brought this up when we were talking about COVID-19 work that I know some other communities are doing, which is having sort of community ambassadors, people who help the city engage and connect with certain groups in the community, whether that is sort of our people who are Ethiopians in our community or other groups. Maybe it's seniors, maybe it's, whatever group we're talking about connecting with, and not just expecting the same people to always do this work for free, but to actually provide some type of stipend for that work. And so some of the groups that might be sometimes harder to reach, and we engage with them. So I know, budgets aren't unlimited, but in terms of thinking about, especially at this time when it's harder to reach people anyway under COVID, that might be something to explore as we're looking to, as you said, move beyond the same people we tend to hear from on these issues. And I do think there's probably a lot of learning we can do from what Brick and Story has been doing on the New Hampshire Rec Center, because that's been really, I think, very successful. So I will, turn it over now to Councilman Searcy.
Great. Thank you so much. One thing that came to mind for me when talking through the community outreach is the emphasis on having experts and community kind of input on specific recommendations. And I think one of the challenges with the prior community engagement is it really did become more of calling all of the activists in our community and less about truly engaging everyone, meeting them where they are. And we didn't really hear from everyone until there was this until the recommendations came out, and then people understood the direct impacts of their bottom line budgets of what was being proposed. So I would encourage to kind of think about not necessarily hosting community outreach from the purpose of just education, because that is not a draw for a person who's running a business. It's not. And we need them to be at the table to offer up insights on what it is that, these kinds of changes would impact their business. So if it is more from the perspective of trying to engage people about certain, once those recommendations are kind of in a draft form and kind of talking to people about, well, how would you feel if how would eliminating gas impact your business? Those are that's the time when engaging certain groups matters the most. I also think that for some of our harder to reach residents, tying this into other meetings, so neighborhood association meetings, tenant meetings, other events that are happening that you're naturally going to get that draw of people versus asking people to call into a meeting to hear from an expert from Spokane, Washington about sustainability. It's just not something that's going to really draw people in. I also think that, what first came to mind to me is once we're at a point where we maybe have some more finite recommendations, I could see this as being an area of participatory budgeting because, is this a ballot question, right, in the future? Because these types of policy changes requires people to commit not only their own resources, but the city's resources as well. And I think that might also be a way for us to start to think about how to move forward with engaging the community on things that's going to have a substantial impact on how their home operates and what they purchase for their homes and how they spend money, to kind of get their buy-in, because it's more than just the tax dollars, right, in this case. But I think that what the community outreach pieces that you have here are sound. I mean, I think they're spot on, but I just would encourage not making the community session so focused on getting technical insights on specific recommendations and more about just trying to talk to people about what their thoughts are around energy efficiency, sustainability, what they might be willing to do, in order to move their part forward. And that might be a way to kind of get some other folks who weren't at the table the first time because it didn't resonate, to be at the table this time.
Thank you. And I definitely took what your feedback was back in February and March to heart. And I want to make those points central to this community. It's not community outreach, it's community engagement, it's community-driven recommendations and community-driven implementation plans, and really taking a hard look through the training I've been doing with USDN and GARE to look at, where we are in the matrix of, community, I'm going to tell you this is a policy we're interested in doing versus community, tell us what you need, tell us what you want. And so I want to work as hard as I can to get to that place.
Great, thank you. Gina, do you mind taking down the PowerPoint so it makes it a little easier to see everybody? I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Great. Let's see. Councilman Searcy, are you good?
Sorry, I always forget to lower my hand, but
no, it's okay.
Yeah, that was great.
Thank you very much. Councilman Dabala.
Yes, thank you, Gina, for all of that. That was a lot, especially under the circumstances of a city hall shutdown. On the community, you're right. I'm most interested in talking about the community sessions also, and the outreach that we discussed in the spring. What we what we as a council said that we wanted to see. And Councilmember Searcy's right on target with wanting to reach people at asking questions and framing it in ways that relate to what their concerns are, so that you actually get useful feedback coming back. And I think that's really, really important. And so in that spirit, I would be interested in having you check out what the result of the community ambassadors approach that the county tried this summer in the middle of COVID with multifamily buildings, how that went and how successful that was, because I think that's got some potential as one way to reach out to people, and also one way to draw business, if you will, both for housing related work and for efficiency and climate related work. And on the sessions generally, besides borrowing from the rec center experience, it seems to me that when the housing and community development people are able to slow down, we will find that they've got a wealth of information, contacts, approaches, what has worked, what hasn't, in this most challenging of times for reaching out to people. And I think drawing on their experience over the last few months is really, really key. And to that effect, I know it's really hard to do this without Zoom, but there's got to be some ways to reach people. There are still people who are not online. There are people who don't know how to Zoom. We had one of those tonight earlier during public comment, somebody who just couldn't make the connection. So we do need to think of ways to reach those people who are not part of the digital universe. And again, back to the ambassadors, back to some of the other outreach techniques that have worked during COVID for housing and small businesses, and linking up with some of those approaches. But I think this is great. Thank you so much for putting this forward.
Thank you. Yeah.
And I'm pleased to see the progress in the other arenas, the county efforts. I just want everyone else to know, I think Gina kind of slid over the part about the county didn't just do these things without a little prodding from city staff. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I do love that the ambassadors. I would love to see something like that implemented in Tacoma Park. I think that we should be paying people for their time and their effort. I was on a really interesting presentation today with Philly and Raleigh, who are doing that. So there are some good models that we can draw from.
Great. Councilman Kostick.
Thank you very much. I just want to reiterate and emphasize that I also like the idea of community ambassadors, and I think that's a great way to reach out to people. And I also really would like to see some connections with those tenant associations, neighborhood associations, as Councilmember Searcy said, meetings that are already happening anyway, and would be a great way to reach people who might not be naturally pulled into a meeting on this topic. And I also think, just as those conversations are happening, I think it'll be really useful to frame them with as little lingo as possible, because I know it's easy for your eyes to just sort of glaze over when you're not in this field every day. And so maybe focusing on things, also things like the financial impacts, the indoor air quality and health impacts of changes, or utility expenses, or reductions in utility expenditures, things like that. I think that might resonate with people who maybe aren't necessarily as focused on the climate change issue and the nuances of that, but might be more attracted to sort of these other aspects, or more familiar with those and interested in those in their everyday life. And then the other thing I wanted to say is I think it's great that you are focusing so much on the community outreach, and I think that is going to be a really essential part of this. And I appreciate also the emphasis on racial equity, and on making sure that this is a an effort that gets to all residents and really gets their input as we make these decisions. And I think focusing much of this work as well from an environmental justice perspective also will be useful in terms of connecting with people and connecting the dots in terms of why this is so important as well. So I'd like to see that moving forward in addition to what we're talking about now. And I really appreciate your work, and I'm looking forward to seeing the next steps.
Thank you, Casey. And I think one of the other things that I've learned through the training I've been doing is relinquishing or giving other people control. And so that means these community sessions aren't necessarily facilitated or led by me. And I think that is going to help a lot with getting different kinds of input and also not getting bogged down in lingo and acronyms, which I do. And I can't help it, so.
Great. Councilmember Kovar.
Thank you. One comment and one question. You made reference to the engagement that's being done around the New Hampshire Avenue Recreation Center, and I think that's a really important model for how we might do more engagement going forward. And the one thing I would emphasize is that a key part of that is all the different languages. And so just as you continue forward with that, I urge you to keep that in mind. And I think that was one of the things that made that Bergen Story engagement proposal so attractive to everybody. So I think that's a useful model. And then the second thing, if you could just say a few more words, and maybe you did and maybe I missed it, about how the tree calculations would work in terms of their impact on the sequestration and so on. I think you talked about that earlier, but I'm not sure I caught all of it. So maybe you could just summarize that briefly if you wouldn't mind.
Absolutely. So we have LiDAR data that we can use to measure not just the size of our tree canopy, but also the change in tree canopy from time period to time period. And that's going to allow us to quantify the sequestration power of our tree canopy. So how many tons of CO2 can we subtract from our greenhouse gas inventory? And how does that help us get to net zero? So if we have 100 megatons of carbon dioxide in our greenhouse gas emissions, can we subtract 10%, 5%, 25%, depending on the size of that tree canopy and the health of it. And I'm particularly interested in looking at not just where we are currently, but what happens when all of the oak trees die, and what happens when we replant, and how long do we have to wait until that actually starts to impact our inventory again, because we know that the power of time is really important when it comes to the trees.
So
this protocol will help us through all of those big questions.
So one of the things I would suggest that you look at, if you aren't already, in the tree resolution that we approved over the summer as a companion to the changes to the tree ordinance, it calls for staff to develop a draft plan, I think by the end of March, if I remember the date correctly, for how we would manage the tree canopy going forward and what our urban forest policies ought to be. And in the past, we really managed that more by the permitting process than by stopping and coming up with a more formal plan. So this is an important change. But I think a key part of that has to be the component that you're talking about. So, they said you're over there in Public Works and you talk to the people all the time, but I encourage you to make sure that I think the new urban forest manager is supposed to be starting fairly soon, if I understood correctly. And if that's true, you ought to try to get in on the ground floor as they begin to work on that proposed plan to ensure that what you just talked about gets woven into it.
Oh, absolutely. I plan to be bugging him all the time. I hear he has GIS skills.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much for this presentation as we continue this work. And I think we all really appreciate knowing the work you do in the city, and then also what you're doing at the county level and regionally with COG, and how important that work is. And I just want to say thank you also on the community engagement piece, and just sharing with us also like what you're learning through this process. I think we all acknowledge you are hired as a sustainability manager for your expertise on sustainability, climate, and other things. Part of the work we're doing in the city now is really making sure we're doing that community engagement, and that we're really looking at engagement and having people not just give input, but part of the decision-making process. And we added that to your job description. We are all, we want to acknowledge that as well. And so we thank you that you see that as a priority in your work as well. And so thank you for that partnership as we work on this together. And I will forward you some of the stuff on the community ambassadors that I got from the equity officer in Boulder as just something to consider moving forward. So great.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Good night. Thank you. Terrific. All right. We have just 2 other work sessions. The next is we're going to be joined, I think Ann is, yep, there's Ann, popped up again already. We're going to talk about now preparation for the 2021 legislative session with our legislative advocate. And so I think, Ann, do you want to take it away? Actually, introduce yourself because we've had some changes at Public Policy Partnership, and we're used to seeing Alice Wilkerson, and she has moved on, but we are very glad to have Ann with us, and she's been working on with us now for, is it the last couple of weeks, couple months, I guess? I don't know. Time means nothing anymore.
Beyond that.
Yeah. So we're glad to have you on board, Ann, as our legislative advocate in Annapolis, and I'll let you take it away.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. A few of you will remember that I actually worked with the city council and the mayor when we first started to engage with the city a number of years ago. I'm 10 maybe or so years ago. So anyway, it was I kind of feel like I'm coming back to you all. So very happy to be here. I will be taking on representing you. Of course, when the city engaged with us, you engaged with our firm, Public Policy Partners. And so while the workload is generally handled by one person, and most recently it was Alice, you do get all of us. And so I'm not unfamiliar with the issues that you all have been working on, and just need to, a little bit of time to get up to speed on absolutely everything, but hope to do that very quickly. Look forward to engaging with you all as much or as little as is needed to get us through. I did want to, in talking about what's coming up with the Maryland General Assembly, there are a lot of unanswered questions about how the 2021 session is going to function. We are certain that most of it, close to all of it potentially, will be virtual. And we do believe that there will be limits that we haven't seen before on public input into the process. We are told repeatedly by staff in the Speaker's office and the Senate President's office that those changes are not permanent. That everybody is hoping that 2021 will be a totally once in a lifetime session. And so it's not to be thinking that if there are some of those limitations that we don't like, it doesn't mean that they will continue. At the same time, we hope that if there are changes that lead to increases in transparency, increasing in access to public input, we actually will hopefully work to make them stay. So a lot more to be decided. We believe that decisions will be made sort of as final as they can be, I guess, before the end of the month. And that's just because legislators need to make plans, especially for the majority of them who have other jobs. They need to have time to make those arrangements depending on how session's going to look. So we hope to hear soon about how things are going to work. We've already seen from some of the committee work that's happened in the last few months that they have limited the number of people who can testify. We believe that there will be some degree of that during session. So there are a lot of rumors, there are a lot of ideas, there are a lot of suggestions, and folks are happy in the legislature to take suggestions on how things might work. But they're also very aware that municipalities and county governments and other state general assemblies are meeting and doing things. So I believe they are taking the time to try to learn from what others are doing as they figure out how they're going to proceed. So I do say that for the things that are working well for you all, conducting your business virtually, if there's some best practices to pass along, I think we should definitely do that. Wanted to just talk about what we see as the main topics that will be discussed during session, the main things that'll come up, and they kind of fit into 3 buckets, not isolated buckets, very much intertwined buckets. The first one is the budget. The budget outlook for Maryland, as it is for, I think, all the other states in the nation, is not good. We'll get an update actually tomorrow morning from the Department of Legislative Services on the latest revenue estimates. But the general numbers are big, anywhere from $2 to maybe $3 or more billion in deficit for the next 2 budget years, state budget years. This is going to have an impact on everything that gets discussed and decided in Annapolis in January. And that will include legislative vetoes. Certainly one of the biggest ones is the Blueprint for Maryland's Future, also known as the Kirwan Commission's Public Education Bill, and whether or not they'll have the votes to override that. The veto of that bill. Deep cuts will be expected when we see the governor's budget in mid-January, and also proposals to reduce mandatory spending through the bill that accompanies the budget most years, the Budget Reconciliation and Financing Act. That all sounds very gloomy doomy, I know, but that also supposes no intervention from the federal government. And so we don't know yet what the federal government may do in terms of either direct aid to state governments, or how much they may provide in additional stimulus money that will mitigate some of the damaging effects that we've seen in the economy due to the response to the pandemic. Of course, that means that maybe there's some room for optimism depending on what happens with the election next month. Of course, we may not know the results of the election for a while after the election. So we don't know what opportunities there will be to be optimistic. But I do want to point out that the stimulus that had happened in the spring had an impact on Maryland's budget. When Maryland closed out fiscal year 2020, back at the end of June, the budget deficit there was no budget deficit. We ended a little in the black at the end of the fiscal year. So I don't think we want to underestimate the impact that potential future assistance from the feds will be. And so, but it's, you don't want to be overly optimistic, but you also, we don't want to be all gloomy doomy. We do want to be realistic and be hopeful that we'll be able to do that mitigation to some of the budget problems. So that's the number one issue that's going to oversee everything. The other issue is most obviously going to be legislation related to COVID and what kinds of emergency responses the legislature wants to take or the governor needs to take in the form of statutory changes. There will be relief proposals related to unemployment insurance and trying to address some of the problems in that system right now. Changes potentially to Maryland sick leave law. Eviction prevention is a very big topic right now. And of course, various public health measures, whether that's telehealth or other ways to improve or maintain the access to some health measures that this emergency has opened up and potentially continuing that access. Telehealth is the big example of that, I think, right now in the healthcare world. The third big bucket of issues that will be among the three highlights or big issues will be bills related to racial justice. There will be bills aimed at police accountability, healthcare disparities, housing and food insecurity, broadband access, and the disparate impact of climate change on communities of color. We all know that the pandemic has highlighted and exacerbated racial inequities that already exist in structures in our society. And I believe that the national climate will not just allow, but I think force the Maryland General Assembly to look at a number of issues through a different lens this coming session. The Attorney General as well had convened a task force looking at COVID-related issues, and that very large task force will be making recommendations that very intentionally are being made with and through a racial justice lens. So again, those issues are all intertwined, but those will be the main themes of what we will hear during the 2021 session. We've been told by many sources within the General Assembly that legislators are being told that if a bill can wait, don't introduce it. If it doesn't fall into one of these buckets or have some kind of immediate time, if it doesn't have a time sensitivity, let it wait until 2022. So I do know that there is a very time sensitive priority for the City Council, and that's related to the Purple Line. And while that's not necessarily a bill that we'll see, it is a project that I do believe is seen as very time sensitive. And the kind of attention that we've seen in the press that's come up in some budget hearings, legislative hearings during the interim about the project, I think it is something that is not going to get sidelined in the coming months. So those are the highlights. I am happy to answer specific questions, and it also get your, if you've heard some additional scuttlebutt, because again, until things are final, we're hearing a lot of suggestions and rumors about what may happen. And so if you have something reliable to share, please do.
Great. Thank you so much, Anne. And I should have said, when you started that, I remember when you were our point person for the city, and I don't think there's been anyone who knows the budget process in Annapolis better than you. So I really should have put that as part of the start of your introduction today. And I think given the session that we're looking at right now, we are very glad that you are with us moving forward. So thank you for that. And I'll turn it over to Councilmember Smith.
And thank you for the presentation. I met with a local business owner. He is actually an insurance broker, and he is just being crushed by the fallout from COVID-19. Have you heard anything if the state is going to provide or think about providing more direct access to Maryland business owners to some type of funding mechanism?
So I know that I have heard in numerous hearings of different committees, also the House and Senate have a joint work group on COVID. I've heard a lot of presentations from the Department of Commerce about grants and loans that have both come from the federal government as well as state pots of money. So there has certainly been a lot of emergency funding that's been made available. Not nearly enough, but a lot that's been geared toward large businesses, small businesses, nonprofits. So nonprofit businesses, for-profit and nonprofit. So I have not heard what kinds of things may continue. I don't know how much the state may be willing to step in, depending on how much the federal government may step in. But we can certainly keep our ears open for what kinds of proposals might be out there specific to any additional aid, such as those PPP loans. But there have been other pots that had been created at the beginning of the crisis.
Yeah, and this business owner told me that he did receive the PPP loan, but that money is basically gone now.
That's correct.
And business hasn't returned. So, it's a struggle of trying to move money that was supposed to be allocated to retirement to keep the business going. Another thing is data surrounding COVID. Has the General Assembly and in some of the meetings, they talk about providing more data, granular data to the local jurisdictions on who has it, how many tests have been provided specifically in municipalities. Is there any interest in giving us more access to data?
So I know that there are dashboards that exist at the state level, and if it's not every single jurisdiction, I certainly believe most of the jurisdictions have data dashboards. In terms of how granular it can get, I'm not aware. I just haven't asked the question. If any municipality is able to get granular data related to that, I'm certainly happy to reach out.
Yeah, we have the dashboard
to find out. I think a lot of it's really being managed by local government more than the state health department. But happy to look into how much detail we can get in the Montgomery County data.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Councilman Kostick.
Thank you very much. You mentioned the Kirwan Commission, and I'm wondering if you or what you are hearing with regard to support for education, as well as families and children and childcare during COVID, and given the circumstances that we're in with a lot of the schools in the state being virtual and childcare businesses closing and a lot of those strains. Are you hearing, what's the long-term outlook both for education and for the shorter-term outlook in terms of childcare and education and in the COVID context?
So what we understand are the discussions around whether or not the General Assembly will override the veto on Kirwan. is the two main things we hear are first, that part of it depends on whether or not the federal government provides aid to the states, and if so, how much. That will weigh on decisions related to that override. In addition, we are hearing that it's most likely that any override would be accompanied by additional legislation to address some of the funding aspects of the law as it had passed and been vetoed. So having to do with the timeline for how the money will be expended, making it drawn out so that it's not as much money at a time per year. And then also potentially shifting some of the money. So for example, because of virtual learning, potentially shifting some of the money in the bill as passed to focus more on some broadband and hardware access and maybe some other ideas related to that. So that's what we're hearing specific to some of the education funding. As far as childcare goes, I think we've all heard that the governor's given permission, or I should say the Superintendent Salmon has given permission for all of the child care centers to ramp up to capacity. I think that was just last week, right? So very recently. So I'm not familiar enough to know if where every jurisdiction is in making that happen. Will there be additional dollars for childcare to go to existing childcare to help, again, whether it's just the assistance they need because so many had been closed, and just financially, are they able to operate? Childcare is absolutely one of those issues that is on the list of very many related to the business aspect and the funding aspect, as well as the what happens if there is a spike in COVID cases this winter and if things shut down again. So it's very much a topic of discussion. I have not heard of any specific proposal, but that doesn't mean it's not out there. But I'll certainly make sure that we're asking the right people about that.
Great, thank you. The other question I had was if you have heard anything about workforce development programs in terms of support directly for individuals, as well as any support for municipalities or counties to be working on those programs.
I've not. It's not come up in the hearings that I've observed. It doesn't mean it's not being talked about, but it's certainly something that comes up every year in normal years. I don't know why it wouldn't come up again this year. When we talk about how COVID has highlighted and exacerbated existing racial disparities, workforce development is certainly an area where, unfortunately, there is that impact. So I think that is an area that would be considered this year in terms of, they're not wanting to deal with some things, but wanting to make sure they're dealing with some of these issues that, the opportunity, the moment we are here in history, really, I think will compel a lot of attention on these issues where there's the data that demonstrates the racial disparities.
Thank you.
Great. Councilwoman Searcy.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Anne, for coming out and staying so late. You hit on all of the big ticket items for me, so I don't want to belabor that in terms of policing, Purple Line, which is huge for my ward. But one thing that I did wonder about, because you had mentioned that there's lots of task forces working on a lot of things. I'm familiar with what the police accountability kind of group is working on. Mental health services. Has there been, I know that's coming up as part of the police aspect of that task force, but is there, any more concrete kind of rumblings in terms of mental health services?
Yes. So before the pandemic, the issue of crisis services was a topic that was getting growing attention in Annapolis circles, including from the administration. The governor has a commission that is headed up by the lieutenant governor on behavioral health and mental health issues. And they have a subcommittee that's been meeting now for about 2 years on crisis services. And I think they've come up with some, good models and examples. A lot of it's waiting for the funding to happen. We were waiting for the funding prior to the pandemic. And so, what happens now when we know that mental health needs are only growing as a result of the pandemic? So folks are still looking at crisis response, and that is, you're right, it is tied to the police accountability measures and how can we get people services so that the police don't get involved in a mental health crisis. There's a lot going into there's a lot of money in the Kerwin bill that passed, the Maryland Blueprint for Maryland's Future that passed, that is for school-based behavioral health services, obviously then specifically for kids. So there's a lot out there. So much of it really has to do with the funding. So we've got to see how much of a priority that will be in governor's budget decisions.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilman Duvall.
Yes, just mentioning that, as you probably already know, community choice energy was a priority for the city last year, and it's coming back again this year, as I understand it, from Delegate Charkoudian in a different form, in a county form. So that's small potatoes in this really big picture of what's going to happen in Annapolis in the session this year, but it's a priority that's pretty important to this city. Just wanted to mention that since we were talking about climate earlier this evening, I'll just keep going on that. Already I've seen a list of a couple of dozen climate related bills that might get introduced. I think it's fair to say, based on the conversations and what we supported last year, that a couple that focus, for example, on low and moderate income public housing energy targets, that focus on financing for multifamily buildings for energy efficiency, some of the bills coming out of our delegation, to name two, are areas that touch both the equity priority and the climate priority. So I'm jumping ahead and suggesting to our group that we think about focusing our efforts this year on the bills that do both. And we can, as the bills come out, we can talk more about that, but I just want to get that on everybody's radar screen. That's what I'm thinking about right now. That's it. Thank you.
That's okay.
Great. All right. Seeing no other hands, I think thank you, Anne, for coming this evening and giving that update on what we can anticipate in Annapolis. And I'm sure as things firm up and after our own elections here in the city, the new council will be talking with you as Councilor Dabala just kind of started on priorities. I think you probably have a sense from talking to many of us, it is as Councilwoman Searcy said, Purple Line, looking at impacts on that, the policing and public safety, mental health, climate change. Those were priorities for us last year, and they're going to continue to be. So
That's all very helpful, and I hope to have some more concrete answers concrete examples and of legislation and definitive answers about process for you next time we talk.
Great. And I think I did see something on either Facebook or somewhere that they did set the date for when they're going to have the Montgomery County delegation. And it was like one of those things that flew by me, but I think because it's always so soon after elections that I just want to raise that and put that out there, just because it will be a new council, that we should make sure that we get that on a calendar and are prepared, since we know sign up for these things, since what we did for the police sign up, they haven't quite worked out the kinks yet on that. And I think maybe they could talk to our own Jesse Carpenter, city clerk, on how to figure out how best to get people to sign up for meetings. So
I'll reach out to the delegation staff and try to get as many details as possible.
Great.
I do want to jump in though on that to note how very different it is to submit testimony and to sign up for things so far remotely, and in ways that don't make easy sense. So I really appreciate that Anne has been trying to walk us through it when it just is not like it's been for years.
Yep. Though I gotta say, not having to go to Annapolis to testify was kind of nice. So there are benefits to that. All right.
Can I ask one more question, which you just touched on, Anne? Is there some sense that we are going backwards in terms of accessibility to the State House after such major progress in opening the place up? Or is it just glitches in how you sign up for testimony?
So because things are going to be virtual, there will be less access. I mean, even physically, right now, the public is not allowed in the State House buildings. The State House are the office buildings. And we don't know if they will open up or not. I mean, so even as a lobbyist, as somebody who's in Annapolis every day during session normally, will I maybe be working from home some days, because if you literally cannot go to Annapolis, if the legislators are not in Annapolis, because, Monday through Wednesday, they're doing all of their committee work virtually. So there's that physical aspect. And then there's the technical aspect. Legislators and their staff some of them are really worried that if anybody can upload written testimony from anywhere, does that mean on, a bill where in the past in paper, you deliver either the paper, or this last session, we did it electronically, and on a bill, they might get 20 pieces of written testimony. Are they going to get 100? Are they going to get 200? Can their computer system literally handle the volume that may not materialize? So there are a lot of questions. Even after they decide what process they're going to use, I think the technical capabilities, like we found out the hard way at the end of session last spring, when we could not watch online what was going on because we are told that they've increased the bandwidth of their internet server. But so we don't know what glitches then may happen on top of that. So I think one of the things that at my firm, and I'm sure other lobbyists are doing as well, is making sure that we know the process and that we are as on top as possible of the technical aspects of how we're going to be signing people up, how we get written testimony in. And then honestly, it's going to be needing a lot of cell phone numbers to communicate with legislators and their staff to make sure that we are hearing everything. So I think it's going to be more limited than we've ever seen. And the hope is that it really is temporary. It really is a once in a lifetime thing. I think everybody that I've talked to, in legislators and staff, are really struggling with how to do this in a fair way to the public, but in a way that doesn't, crash their systems and make them all have to work 23 hours a day.
Okay, thank you.
And can I just ask a quick question? I'm on MML's board. What are you hearing about HUR restoration, full restoration? And the last session, we did get the sunset clause eliminated. It was voted on in the Senate side, but the House didn't get a chance to vote on it because of COVID-19 and everybody was sent home. Have you heard anything that it's going to be brought back?
So I have not asked specifically. I would imagine, we see every year when there are budget problems that the highway user funds are subject to or at risk. So I will ask the folks on the Budget Transportation Subcommittee what they're hearing right now.
Okay, thank you.
I apologize for the cat.
And I heard the debate had a fly, so you have your cat. All right. Well, thank you, Anne, very much. We will be talking to you soon.
Great. Thank you all. Good night.
All right. The last thing we have this evening is just kind of an update on where we are with elections from our city clerk.
Sure. So this evening I've uploaded, I am tired now. I've uploaded a new election calendar that shows several things. One, it shows a more likely date for when people will begin to receive their ballots. It will be next week. It won't be this week. So we are encouraging people who don't get them by the 16th to feel free to call or email anytime after that. I've also added to the calendar the days and times when staff or board members will be available to assist voters with voter assistance, accessible ballot marking devices, voter registration, replacement ballots, and anything like that. And all that will be in the parking lot behind the community center from October 22 through November 2nd. And finally, the last thing I wanted to mention was, Mayor Stewart, last week you raised a question about ballots, people dropping off other people's ballots. And there is not a prohibition on that. Again, I'd encourage people to be careful about using something like that, but there is not a prohibition on that. And ballots that are handled should absolutely be sealed. Obviously, if they're being brought to the drop box by someone else.
But I would like to follow up on that, though. The city attorney did advise that it is not in a good interest for city employees or elected officials to be the ones to do that. There's liability issues related to that. And so you need to trust who it is, but it's highly advisable that it not be city officials.
Mm-hmm. But designated by the Board of Elections?
The Board of Elections, I'm sorry, other than that.
Yeah, okay.
Right.
Yeah, no, yes. Board of Elections folks, they got their own thing. I'm sorry.
Yeah. All right, Councilmember Kovar.
Just one question. Do people have to sign their ballots or their envelopes?
Oh, yeah, there's an oath or affirmation statement on the ballot envelope. So people should sign that, sign and date it. They're asked to print their name, sign their name, and date it. If we identify ballots that don't have a signature, we will certainly try to contact the voter to have them correct that error. But they must be signed.
But if they aren't there, you can't find them, they're invalid, right?
If that were to happen, yes. But we would, obviously we'll do everything we can to try to reach a voter if necessary.
Okay, thank you.
Great. And do we know what the envelopes are going to look like yet?
Yeah, We almost do. We do. We do. They will have. They won't have a color on them, but they will have a black stripe that will make them stand. The return, the ballots that are coming back to us will have a black stripe, and they'll look different, very different from the presidential election ballots that are being returned. So it'll be easy to identify if one is if they're mixed up. It won't be hard to identify them.
Sorry, I meant to ask, do you have a recommendation between dropping them off versus mailing them back?
But to be honest, it saves the city money if they're dropped off. People should, it will save us money, but the postage will be paid if it's put in the mail. So either is just fine.
Great. All right. Well, thank you for that update on the elections. And I think I don't see anything else on our agenda for this evening. Don't forget that we have a closed session next week that begins at 6 p.m. on legal advice from the city attorney, and then our meeting next week. And I think our meeting next week might be a little longer, so just FYI. All right. Thank you all for everything this evening, and have a good night.
Good night.